and say, put the mic on and say good morning everyone. Thanks to the people who are here today, and good morning too to anyone who's sitting at home watching the webcast. There are still spaces in the gallery here for anyone who wants to pop down for Housing Committee today, 14th of September. So, morning to everyone. We've got the agenda in front of us. Assume everyone's got some sight of the agenda pack and also see that the people have read the papers. We've got Apologist Day from Councillor Terry Fox and Councillor Mazur Iqbal standing in. We've got a couple of people who might be coming late, but I think otherwise the whole committee is here or it's shortly expected. So we've just got usual housekeeping, given the people in the room, you know about the fire alarms, you know about the toilets. Can you put your phones on to silent, please, and laptops too? I think that's everything there. Should we start on the introductions? So, shall I go round, starting with Councillor Maulana?
Hi, Councillor Nabila Maulana for Park and Arbourthorne.
Mazur Iqbal, elected member for Darwin Ward. Thank you, Chair.
Paul Turpin, one of the Green Councillors from Gleadless Valley Ward.
Sorry. Alan.
Alan Woodcock, Councillor for East Ecclesfield.
Barbara Masters, Councillor for Ecclesall.
Councillor Penny Baker, Councillor for Stannington and Deputy Chair.
Right, thanks. I'll ask the officers to introduce in a moment, yeah. Apologies to all the people who've just come into the room who are, I guess, sitting on the public seats, and yeah, so some staff, some public. We've just done the round of introductions. There are name cards there. But yeah, welcome, thanks for coming in. It was just doing the usual blurb about the fact that we're not expecting a fire alarm, etc. If there's a fire, then follow people to get out. Toilets are, well, you need to ask someone if you don't know where they are. And if anyone's got mobiles there, can you just put them onto silent? Same with laptops and things will disturb the meeting. So, okay, so we've just had apologies. Alison's just entered the room. So I wonder if we can ask Councillor Norris to just introduce herself for the record, and then I'll go through the officers.
I'm Alison Norris, Councillor for Woodhouse.
Thank you very much. All right, so if I just go round the officers, just for convenience, I'm going to go round to the left.
David Hollis, General Counsel.
Thank you very much. Of this side.
Dean Butterworth, Head of Council, Housing, Investments and Maintenance.
Janet Sharp, Director of Housing for Housing and Neighbourhood Services.
Morning everyone, Tom Smith, Director of Operational Services, responsible for the Housing Repairs and Maintenance Service.
Rachel Marshall, Principal Democratic Services Officer.
And the one who always gets forgotten, Alan, do you want to introduce yourself? So you're at every committee meeting, yes, but you are always ignored.
Hello, I'm Alan Harris, Democratic Service Support Officer here for Tax Support. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan, for everything that you do to make these committee room meetings function. Okay, welcome everyone. So I've got a picture of who's here. So as noted, we've got apologies from Councillor Terry Fox. On item 2, it's exclusion of press and public. I don't think there's anything in there that's a confidential day, so nothing to do there. 3 is declarations of interest. So I just want to invite any declarations of interest from any member, which usually comes up in connection with the private sector housing stuff. Anyone got any declarations on any particular items?
Yeah, I mean, if it's private housing stock, I do rent a property, but I don't think anything in the document affects me, apart from the obvious legislation.
Yeah, renting wouldn't be a personal interest that you need to declare unless it affected you more than it affected the rest of the renters in the city, which I don't think it will do.
Sorry, just to clarify, you're talking about you rent from someone or rent to someone in terms of a declaration? What would the advice as a private sector landlord?
I'm assuming that that's on your record of personal interests. Yes.
Yes, my interest is mentioned on my
In
statement.
that case, you only need to, only if it directly affects that interest as opposed to generally in the city, would you need to make any declaration, particular declaration, and take any action?
No, it does not affect, sort of, what I've in the document does not affect me directly.
Thanks, yeah, I think it's probably right there. I'm assuming that you're not renting an HMO, in which case item 10 will be quite applicable. But yeah, okay, so that's fine, I think. Okay, Councillor Iqbal.
Similar declaration as Councillors Masters. I have declared it in my declaration of interest. And it's not a HMO. So hopefully participate. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks. That's helpful to have. So those are both personal declarations, aren't they? Any other declarations of interest on any of the items? No, don't think so. Right, let's move on. So next item is the minutes of the last meeting, which you'll find at page 11. So can I ask anyone the people who've read them to propose they're approved as a correct record? Nabila, yes, I think you're proposing a correct record. Seconded by someone? Seconded by Councillor Baker. Is that everyone happy to accept those as a true record? Yep, I think nods mean that that's unanimously accepted. It's for the record, Rachel. Okay. And just the one set of minutes there, so that is that item done. So back to item 5. We now get on to the important bit where the public is in now. So let me just check. So as I understand it, we've got Martin Lawton here, who's got a question. And I think we haven't got anyone else who's from the press, from the public to ask a question, have we? Okay, let's deal with Martin Lawton first, and then come on to that. So, welcome to the committee. Would you like to come up to a mic? If you come to that end seat, I think, Martin, if you're there, then you can press the red button. Have a seat, press the red button, and thanks, Alan.
There was no red button. So
there wasn't, no. It was a red light, having pressed a non-red button. Thank you. Yeah, have a seat, ask your question. I've got a rough note of your question, and then we'll try and give you an answer.
Thank you, Chair, members and officers for allowing me to speak today. I would have come to the last meeting, but I found out that you have to put the question in beforehand rather than what I was used to. I asked this question at a local area committee a few months ago, and the members and officers were clueless, totally clueless on all political parties, because we're three all there, of anything to do with this. But my question is, and I'll have to add a bit to it because I've realised a couple of things were missing. What plans have been made to install electric car charging points for council-owned flats and maisonettes? If none, when will action be taken to install charging points for those tenants? If I could, I'd like to ask what is also being done for council tenants in HMOs and sundry properties and houses, because obviously we don't want in this city people plugging in an electric car on the pavement and trailing wires over the pavement, and obviously there's issues to do with drop curbs if they're going to be charging. So if I could have some answer, because I think this could be done that will actually help tenants and have a slightly reduction of electricity and housing, make some income from it rather than going out to use the other privately owned ones around the country. Thank you.
Thanks for the question, yeah. The questions about electrical charging are very much a live issue, if I can use a cheesy pun like that. More frequently, they actually come to the Transport Committee because the issues that you raise are actually quite important. And it is fair to say that, it's fair to say that officers have not been clueless about it. There has been quite a lot of discussion amongst transport planning circles about how to anticipate the needs of electrical car charging and how to provide that, and to what extent it's the council's role to provide that as opposed to all the other people who provide electrical charging. So within the housing service, looking at providing electrical charging points for the council's own tenants, the approach we take is based on individual requests and but on the expectation that actually it's not for the general council or the public to subsidise the provision of fuel for individual travel. So we review requests as part of our housing permissions policy. So that's the way that people can ask for permission to adapt or change their property and to install things. Any requests based on cost, the ability to secure it, how we manage the installations with customers, but also the aspect of people with mobility scooters and the provision for them, which is actually a really critical issue because that's about actual access to people's homes. So cost and maintenance regime to consider, keep them working, up to date, and a recognition that actually if there is work that's provided on that, it has to be a charged service. The bottom line, of course, is that the council can no doubt do more if it had lots of spare money and resources at its fingertips, but of all the pressures on the council service to invest in its stock, individual requests for people with electric cars, whilst it is important, is not something that the council will subsidise at the moment, it seems. So there is a little more detail there. We expect that, requests will be reviewed on the merits and suitability, etc. You'll also appreciate there is a difference between the availability around houses that are freestanding and in blocks of flats. And so it's actually quite a tricky issue. A far simpler issue in a way is the issue about provision of electrical charging points where there are terraces, which does apply to a few council sundries, but actually applies to many more owner-occupiers across the city. And as I said, the transport planning team have been looking at that, and it is quite a complex issue. There are pros and cons to that in what is still a fast-changing market. So it's a fairly lengthy response, which may or may not be to your liking, but if you have a council house and you have an electric car, then if you want that, then you need to get the request into the housing office. So I'll not take that because there's a lot of other stuff on the agenda. If there is more stuff that you want to come back in, could you drop us an email, me or anyone else, and we'll see if we can pick that up. That may be. Let's follow up with a further conversation rather than spend more time in this meeting. So thanks for bringing the question, Martin. We'll move on from there. We've got one more question, I think, that's been submitted in writing and where we don't have the person here to ask the question. So, for the record, we have a question from Matthew Smith. I think we should, there's actually quite a series of questions that are quite detailed about the private sector schemes around SNUG and student housing. I'm pretty sure he's had those answers in writing some months ago. So perhaps we could formally note the questions and responses and we can put those in the minutes if that's acceptable to the committee rather than go through quite a lot of stuff. Has these been circulated to the committee? No. All right. Maybe we can do that afterwards and then people can peruse those questions on student registration schemes at their leisure. Would that be okay? If so, that is all the public questions, and I think we can move on to the members' questions, where we've got another two. So, we've got two questions. Councillor Masters, Councillor Woodcock. We've got, I think, tell me, Bob, have you got a written answer to your written question?
Thank you. Yes, I have.
You've got that in writing. I presume all the members of the committee have got that too. Good, okay. I think you've got right to ask any supplementary. Ask away, and we'll see.
Okay, strictly speaking, this bit should not have come to you because I know that the council lands are likely to fall into this category. But what I have raised in full council, and it is applicable to this, is that there's a lot of ignorance about plants, and people are sort of connecting more with sort of observing more about pretty flowers, if you like, or sort of anything that blooms. And ragwort is quite bright. It is getting very prolific. It does appear on council estates. And with rewilding, I'm just thinking about it's not the only plant that can cause harm to pets. Chickens, I don't know if chickens are allowed on any council property, but also sort of the alkaloids can be absorbed through the skin. And I think it worries me more that children especially might be susceptible if they go out picking flowers, which used to be a favourite pastime decades ago. So I think it's a case of, is there a case to be made for information to the general public about plants in general that might cause problems? And ragwort falls into this category, but I know that there's others that do. Thank you. It might be through towers or something.
Right, thanks. I think you've raised the question, and the answer there is in writing, and it's useful for members to digest. I mean, from my point of view, I, as chair of the committee, I think I'd say, yes, I would always welcome wider education to the public on plants and the impact of nature. Very welcome. I'm aware you had quite a more extensive response to a similar set of questions from the experts in Parks and Countryside and the Ecology Unit that were filed through full council. I'd probably suggest it's not something to put on this committee's work plan, given the other things. I mean, whilst you raise an interesting point, you know, frankly, ragwood isn't what people are talking about on most of the council estates, to the best of my knowledge. But yeah, I think it's fair to raise it and go from there. Thanks. And then the second question is from Councillor Woodcock, and that is one where I think we don't have an answer. It's a specific question, isn't it, about thermographic surveys on the Westminster estate. It's a fairly technical question. Obviously, I haven't got the answer. We're waiting for something. I'm going to suggest that I'm just going to have to give you a written response to that in due course. We'll presumably can put that on the website for this meeting, so there'll be a permanent record of it. Doesn't give you much chance for a supplementary question, but you know the score on this. Let's sort of follow up whatever the issue is with that in due course, which you can do with officers anyway. Are you happy with that? Anything?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Douglas.
Great, thanks very much. So that does with the members' questions on item 6. We've got the work programme here. So next thing is to hand over to Rachel Marshall, who will just lead us through where we are with this.
Thank you, Chair. If I could draw the committee's attention into the agenda pack to page 17, which is the start of the committee work programme. If we leaf over to page 18, there's a references section in there, which I am actually going to come back to shortly, just to discuss a referral that came through. So I'll come back to that shortly. Before I do that, if we can turn, leaf over into the Appendix 1, Part 1. In that section, we've got some new and moved items that have been either added or moved to other agendas. And then from page 21 onwards, you'll see future agendas and what is actually planned for this committee. So we would be asking you to approve the recommendations that are set out at the top of page 18. Before we do that, as I said, I was going to refer back to section 2.1. So a referral came through from full council on the 5th of July, and the details of that are a request that the Housing Policy Committee considers adding to its work programme an item on council powers and resources to protect migrants from discriminatory housing regulations, upholding locally defined standards and inspection processes. What I will do now is pass over to Janet Sharp, who can give some more detail on that. Is that okay, Janet?
Thanks.
With regard to this item, happy to bring the response back here. This also was included in a council motion some months ago. With regard to that, I think in terms of for this committee, one of the things that we will do is explain what we do to protect migrants in the city, our refugees and asylum seekers who are now new arrivals for the city. What that will do is actually make sure that they are living in safe homes, they are supported in those homes, and all the necessary regulatory checks are in place to support. There is also obviously other committees that obviously are responsible for managing the asylum policy in the city. And obviously this is something that they will provide their report around that policy to that committee.
Right, thanks for that, Janet. So just to summarise where we are. So first of all, in terms of the referral from full council, the proposal is put that on the work plan for January on the matter that Janet just talked about that will come within, in particular within our private sector housing team. That was recommended by full council, so necessarily there's been a majority of members in the whole council who supported that. So I think we should add that to our work plan. So that will be us considering whether to add it and proposing to add it. Let's see, we've got, yeah, do that. Just run through what are the new items. So for this month, the new item is the damp and mould update, which is on the agenda. For November, we've got commissioning the new furnished accommodation framework. We've got the revenue and capital budget, response to the regulatory consultations, and then the net zero roadmap, which is something this committee definitely wants to talk about, has been postponed but is on the agenda for November, as well as an update on the conditions of tenancy. Then we've got the customer engagement strategy due in December. So those are the additions that are proposed or moved. So that's where we are. Right, comments from Councillor Norris, first of all.
I just wanted...
Oops, sorry.
It's all right. I just wanted to confirm, we've asked for a issue-focused workshop on the HRA business plan between now and the November meeting, because it is such a significant item, and we'd like it to, if possible, to involve somebody from another council that has responsibility for setting the overall housing budget, because we're all facing similar challenges across the country, so a bit of input from as fresh eyes would be really helpful.
That makes sense, but rather than bring it in now, Jan, I just wonder if we should pick that up in one of the housing briefings, but make sure that you can get...
where to ask it, because we were talking about the work plan.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Can we park that there, bring it up in the housing briefings? Janet, could you take a note to put onto the housing briefings thing? It's a good point. I mean, obviously, I completely agree, we need to deal with the HRAs pretty thoroughly. Okay. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. It was just following on from the referral from full council. Obviously, in the report, it mentions, the overspend around interim accommodation, homelessness, and it makes reference in the report that we're going to see a significant number of cases being resolved, which could make people homeless. So, when we get the report in January, it'd be good to understand what the figures are of people either being given asylum to stay or have been asked to leave, because in the budget report, Chair, it makes reference to the pressure that the council is facing. Good to understand what the picture is in January as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point, isn't it? So, because one of the impacts on the homelessness pressures is about the number of people who are being moved from NASA accommodation to mainstream accommodation. So, yeah, I'm sure, Janet's nodding, I'm sure we're from housing will have those answers there.
Yes, certainly. And one of the things that we agreed at the last committee is that we probably need a really detailed discussion as part of the finance report around, the rules around benefits and how they affect local authorities, and particularly where we are placing individuals in emergency accommodation in the city, which is a significant pressure for Housing General Fund and the council. So rather than discuss it here now, one of the things we had agreed to provide quite a detailed report around not only what the rules are regarding benefits for people where we are placing in different types of accommodation, but also in terms of how we might mitigate some of those pressures, where that is possible, like to do, and also how it also affects other providers in the city.
Right, thanks. Yes, Councillor.
I welcome that, Janet, because as a substitute, having read the report, I feel for the service, some of the challenges that you're facing, and this is something that is another challenge. Once a decision, I don't know what the numbers are, again, as a knock-on impact on the service that you provide and the pressure. So I think January would be a good time to understand.
We'll bring it a detailed update in November, but then as part of the budget setting process for the council in January, that will also be included. Sheffield is no different to many other local authorities who are also affected by some of the rulings around benefits, and it is many millions of pounds risk for the council. So we are doing a considerable piece of work at the moment to look at how we can mitigate that risk and also manage those risks going forward. Thank you.
We'll get you a money tree.
Yeah, indeed. So two important issues, yeah, the finance and then the treatment of migrants, which we'll have on as a specific thing in January. Okay, Councillor Molana?
I think my question was related to Councillor Apars actually, but I welcome the commitment to protect migrants from discriminatory housing practices. I'd really like to know, I suppose, what we're putting in place as a service, given how stretched we already are in, the current checks we undertake, and how we're, I suppose, going to do it effectively, especially given that migrants tend to live in HMOs, which they aren't necessarily registered as the landlord, as the tenant, for that property, and landlords aren't very good at reporting who actually lives in their property. So I was just wondering what we had in place to, I suppose, deal with that.
What we can do
sorry,
what we can do is we provided quite a detailed report as part of private sector housing regulations a number of months ago. So we can circulate that report and then obviously bring an additional report in terms of, additional information that we provide to protect some of our most vulnerable people living in private sector accommodation, if that would be helpful in between the meeting.
So we're discussing now about putting this discussion on the agenda for January when we're planning ahead, rather than having it now off the cuff. I think what you flagged up as well is it'd be useful to get some factual information out, so through the knowledge briefings at some point. So yeah, if we could take that up, Janet, and get some of that out, plan that into our programme of briefings, that would be helpful, I think. Is that okay with you, Councillor Milan?
Chair, sorry for the interjection. We do have the HMO licensing, and I was going to raise a couple of questions there, so probably an opportunity to...
Let's move on to that when we can. In terms of the work plan, we've now gone through that. I'll be happy just to agree the usual recommendations, which are on page 18, to agree all the stuff that's in the proposed work programme. General nods? Yep, happy? Right, let's treat that as resolved unanimously. Good, okay, thank you. So if we move on to the substance of the meeting now. We've got item 8, we move to council housing disrepair. Just looking at the time, so it's just after past. We've got housing disrepair, damp and mould. We've then got later monitoring and the complaints handling code, so there's going to be quite a lot of overlap between those. We've got a specific item about HMO licensing review. Should we go straight on to the housing disrepair item? And I'm assuming Tom or Dean. Dean, you're going to take us through that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. The report is for information from previous conversation that we've had at committee in relation to the impacts of disrepair in relation to the numbers and the cost of the cases coming through. The report itself is self-explanatory in that we've seen a massive increase in the number of cases, disrepair cases, that have been reported over the last couple of years. The majority of these cases are a consequence of decisions that not just Sheffield City Council but other landlords made during COVID, that we were stopping doing non-urgent repairs during that period. As a consequence, what has happened there is that we've not fulfilled our legal obligation in relation to completing repairs in council houses, and that has opened the doors for some of the legal challenges that we are facing at the moment. As you can see in 1.4, the table within the report, in April 2018 we had 117 disrepair cases. As of April 2023 that had increased to 1970. That has seen a massive increase in the amount of money that is being paid out. But one of the challenges that we've got, and we're working with Tom and his team to address some of this, is that we are still receiving high numbers of disrepair cases, and at this moment in time we're not closing as many cases that we want to do, so we're seeing month by month increase in the number of cases that are outstanding. What that poses for us in relation to the financial compensation is that we still have a responsibility to pay out through the legal service compensation in these cases. Section 1.11 within here shows the amount of money that we are paying out. So in 22-23 we paid out near enough £3 million in relation to disrepair. What you're also seeing there is actually the compensation to our customers, our tenants, as a consequence of this is relatively low. So in 22-23 our customers received on average about £400 compensation per case, but on average we were paying out nearly £3,000 compensation. The vast majority of that resource goes to the solicitors who are dealing with this case, not to our tenants who are reporting that. So that is the challenge that we've got. We've put within our business plan this year that we will be making a financial saving of 1.2 million through the early resolution implementation plan that we've put in place, where we will be triaging new cases that come through to target those so that we can complete them in time scale. But there are still an overhang in relation to some of those cases that we've still got from the COVID era that we need to address within there. So the report itself is for information and for noting by the committee, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Right, thank you very much. We've got a couple of questions there. I'll just go straight into those actually. So I think Councillor Masters was first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you explain sort of 1.11, the figure on the table? So the last figure, I mean, you're anticipating, well, for the first quarter, it's obviously 210, so you're anticipating that going up much more significantly. But, and the average cost of repairs is likely to be the same. Compensation to customers is likely to go up. But how do you arrive at, can you explain how you arrive at the 6,000 odd average cost per case?
That is the actual cost of the cases that we've settled. So those are the cases that we have taken through litigation, that we've either gone through mediation or trying to get a resolution to those particular cases. Some of the cases are more severe than others, and it's through negotiation, and it's within my delegated authority in terms of how much we pay for those cases. And in some of these cases, and we'll give you an example, some of them we have to pay £10,000 plus in relation to compensation to make sure these cases do not go to court, where potentially our financial liability may be higher. So we try to have the conversation before it gets to that particular point to make sure that we're reducing the liability on the council. But in many of these cases, we don't have any reason not to have to pay this level of compensation.
So, I mean, it's a huge increase from the previous year, though. And it was the jump that I found quite astounding. Wow.
No, and we're doing that as well, and that's why we want to reduce the implications. So the new cases coming through, we want to manage those within our 55-day target. If we manage those cases within that 55-day target, we won't be paying compensation out. So those new cases that come in will get triaged and get managed quickly. Unfortunately for us, because we still have a backlog from COVID, we know we can't complete those within the 55 days. Therefore, those are the cases, and particularly the longer ones, that we will be paying a higher level of compensation out on.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks for clarifying that, yeah. And of course, although you said the cost borne by the council, I presume the cost of these cases is actually borne by tenants across the city who ultimately have to pay into the housing revenue account. And that's one very important reason why we want to minimise the number of these cases that are going through county court processes. Right, okay, we'll go to the other side. We should take Councillor Norris first, if you had a question there. Well, say yours first, because you're being the regular member of the committee.
Thank you. Within the early resolution improvement plan, it seems key to me this engaging additional repair teams. And what I wanted to ask is, what is the, when are you going out to advertisement to recruit the third team? That's part of my question. And the other one is, you're anticipating an additional 4 teams temporarily. Is that 4 teams on top of the 3? Or is that a 4th temporary team? And when is that going out to advert? This is appreciating that it is extremely difficult to recruit across the sector.
I'll answer the first part of that question, and I'll pass over to Tom in relation to the second part. The 4th team will just be a 4th team temporary, because what we don't want to do is recruit permanent operatives to deal with that, knowing full well over the next 12 to 18. Sorry, I didn't spot that. The 4th team will be a temporary team, because the expectation is we'll be reducing the number of disrepair cases coming in, so we won't need a 4th team long term. We feel with the resources that are required to reduce incrementally over a manageable period of time, 3 permanent teams will be sufficient to do that, but a 4th team is required to reduce the initial backlog we got through COVID. But I'll just pass on to Tom in relation to the timescales for getting those 3rd and 4th temporary team in place.
So once we've got the budget identified and we've got the go-ahead to spend the additional budget, it's subject to the market, as you've said, Councillor Norris. It's a relatively quick process to get out and recruit people, especially if we're talking about temporary resource. So we have agency framework arrangements and things like that for trades where we can quite quickly get out and pull additional resource in once the budget's identified. So once we have sign-off on the additional expenditure for within the service, you know, I'm relatively confident within a couple of months we can have the resource in place. We have to do all our usual induction processes and make sure people understand our working practices, IT systems, etc., etc. So, you know, I would expect that, say, with a fair wind, if we can get the budget agreed, probably within 2 to 3 months, the resource will be in place and mobilised and undertaking work for the service.
Councillor Norris, is that okay? Any further question?
Only my own learning the ropes as a new person. Is that the whole budget getting approved next in the new year? We can't do it out of this year's budget.
No, one of the things that we need to identify, as you can see, this is having a significant impact on the overall housing revenue account budget. And if we see this as a way of putting some investment into the service so that then actually we can bring down the cost of the disrepairs work, that is absolutely critical, rather than that being year on year a significant pressure for the HRA business plan. So what we set out in this year's approved programme is that we need to bring the cost of disrepairs back. But also, one of the things that we do need to do is work much closely with like tenants, so that tenants feel that they are listened to, and also that they have the repairs in a timely fashion if they need to. So that, and that's, you know, huge amounts of work's been taking place by, you know, by the housing and the repair service to be able to make sure that we identify early issues with regarding repairs that may not have been carried out as quickly as possible, but where obviously anybody puts in place a disrepair claim, that we obviously manage that as quickly as possible as well to the satisfaction of the tenant through whatever process that follows. But I think in terms of the budget, one of the things we do need to do is we do need to do the recruitment this year. Otherwise, we are waiting another 6 or 7 months before we give the okay to Tom to be able to bring in the additional resources, which means we will be having a further year of high disrepair costs.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, that was my concern, was that we need to get started on it now. So are those adverts going to go out this year? And when was my other question.
Right, good. So crack on with that as soon as possible, yes. Councillor Iqbal?
Thank you, Chair. As a substitute super sub, forgive me if I ask some questions that have probably been covered in a briefing. Last week at full council, as I was walking in, I was asked to deal with somebody who'd come in regarding, they had some casework and it was housing disrepair. 4 years the person had been waiting for. I mean, if you look at the photographs, they were horrific. And if I speak to some cases in my own ward, I've had a similar case. So it is quite devastating, the impact it has on individuals and families. So we recognise the impact, the quality of life it can have on an individual and a family. And I appreciate post-COVID, and it's down to the council to ensure the investment goes in. So I've got a few questions. First one, I was trying to understand what is the cumulative figure of disrepair? Because it mentions 19 on 1.4 on page 37, it refers to a number of figures, and then on page 38, on which you mentioned, Dean, April 2023, 1970. Is that the total cumulative figure of disrepairs in the housing services? That's the figure.
Yes, might be also to give an answer to that first of all, just so we're clear.
That is the number of cases we've received in that financial year alone.
But what's the global figure?
The global figure, I've not got that in the report, but it is in the region of about 2,500. But I will confirm that for the committee.
Is it possible to split that into, because picking up what Janet said earlier, because there's voids, that has an impact on our revenue. So you've got people that are living, who are waiting for the repairs, and then it'd be good to understand, not now, but if a note could be circulated. The other issue, just picking up from, I've got a couple of questions and you can ask me to stop or continue, Chair. Just picking up from what Councillor Norris said around the teams, and you've mentioned some of the contractors we work with. I know it's quite challenging, but if you flip the coin, if you speak to tradespeople out there, they're always looking for work. Sometimes, you know, the size of our contracts, if I'm a small tradesperson, I can't really, because the amount of paperwork and so forth. Remember many, many moons ago, there's been, you know, Birmingham Building Company, you know, a small group, a small business that, in a sense, started to get a lot of work and now employs a large number of people. Are we not doing any workshops or trying to, because I can appreciate we're trying to recruit staff temporarily, but again, getting tradespeople in to do that work, having a bit of, you know, both, a mix of both, to try and speed this up, because you're right, it's having a huge impact on our residents, it's having a huge impact on our budgets, and I feel for you folks, because as I said earlier, you know, you're dealing with a lot of crisis management, and you having to wait for this council to make resources available in a few months, I find that unacceptable. We should be working with you to try and get that resource to you, invest to save as quickly as possible. Yeah. So
is that about getting independent tradespeople in to assist our workforce?
And
it is something we've covered before. I just wonder if we can bring Tom in to, I assume it's Tom,
so
to
shall I
give
just
an
put
answer.
my questions and then...
Well, you've raised a good question. Let's answer this one, if that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I suppose, you know, the challenge for us as a council is that clearly we have to follow our, you know, procurement processes and rules as a public sector organisation, and a lot of that does make it quite challenging actually for small businesses from an administration perspective and a due diligence, financial, you know, risk perspective for the council. which often favours organisations who can carry the level of risk that the council needs them to carry from a financial perspective when it comes to work. You know, market development clearly is something I think we do need to do more work on. Actually, how do we find a way to develop the local market in Sheffield around trades? You know, tenants do have the ability to commission their own repairs up to, you know, a level, but some of these repairs are probably above that level of their ability to go out and buy those independently, so we do need to do them for them. You know, really happy to look at, you know, with our procurement colleagues as to how we might facilitate more independent tradespeople. But as I say, our own internal procurement rules often make that quite difficult from a framework perspective, just because of financial due diligence as much as anything else.
It does need, and I agree with you, Tom, because we experienced it before. If we don't invest in our own staff, that can, in a sense, break down the bureaucracy. So when a tradesperson, and we run these workshops, it makes life easy for them. So we need to invest. I just think after 2-3 years, the challenge that you're facing, if we don't do something quite radical, the problem based on the numbers that we see is just going to increase. I don't know how harbour the point, Chair, but as I say, a lot of councillors cross-party are picking this up, so it's not a political issue. It's how do we serve our residents in the most difficult. I mean, as the Chair said, we've got the Mould, then we've got the other reports around HMO. I just think we need to do more to support your teams.
Tom.
I think the other point I would make, and actually it's a really good point, Councillor Epoch, because all of these things that we're discussing are all interrelated to some extent. You know, we will be discussing the performance report, and you can see that the demand within responsive repairs, for example, is still running at 40% above pre-COVID levels. And then you put that on top of disrepair, you put that on top of the additional stuff around damp and mould and the additional, quite rightly, you know, awareness of that as an issue and us needing to turn that around more quickly. And that does put a degree of pressure on resource. I think the other thing that that will be being brought forward within housing over this next number of months is actually reflecting back, you know, where are these disrepair cases taking place, and are they in certain kinds of properties, and actually does that then mean we need to target our investment into certain kinds of properties? Because what I see a lot as the person managing and responsible for the repair service is we are going into the same kinds of properties repeatedly for disrepair, because actually they have some inherent structural issues that are quite difficult to solve with short-term repair work. That isn't an excuse, it's just our strategy needs to be as much about how we invest in where we know we have problems as it is just about putting loads more resource into the responsive repairs part of it. But we do need to up our resource within the repair service and disrepair. We will do that. We do need to up our resource, and we are doing with the responsive repairs, and we're doing that as well. But you're right, it is challenging for us, and I think the ultimate solution to some of this is about how we target that investment in the long term.
Because you do mention it on page 40, you know, investment is required, and I understand the process you've got to go through the council to acquire that resource. So if there's anything we can do as a committee to support that, I think it's important. Another just couple of quick questions. On 1.11, it's like on legal aid and other matters, the government's legislated where it's put a cap on what the individual and what the legal experts, because it's like ambulance chasers here, you know, 52%, it looks like they get a bit more than the 52%. So
should just clarify, these probably aren't legal aid lawyers.
Yeah.
Just speaking as someone who's campaigned a lot,
yeah.
The need for legal aid.
I mean, taking 60-odd%, you know, the tenant who's gone through that disrepair, that whatever hardship they've had to face with that family, it seems like the solicitors are benefiting. So anything we can do to lobby government to try and bring in a cap would be helpful. The final 2 points, very quickly, Chair, was picking up Councillor Norris's point. How big are these repair teams? Is it 4 individuals? Is it 10? It'd be good to understand how large these teams are.
I've got the detail, but we can provide it, Councillor, in terms of the scale and the size of those teams. I think it will be probably below, a team will be below 10 people. There is a small team, but they are multi-skilled teams, obviously, given the nature of repairs, you know, through joinery, electric and everything else. So.
The final point I'd like to just make, I do pick up language as an issue. It's like the chap who came in last week, he was Iranian, and I can't speak Farsi. So, you know, it was really challenging. He had to get somebody to speak on his behalf. So it's important that, you know, I know it mentions it in some of the other reports, but communications from our side to ensure people know where to go and where to come for information and so forth. Thank you, Chair.
Tom, yeah.
Just very briefly, because some of this does, again, it cuts across all the different reports, so, you know, and I think this is part and parcel of our kind of overall approach, really. You know, we acknowledge that communications with our tenants, especially from the repair service, is just not good enough at the moment. Being, you know, really blunt about it. Some of that is about language barriers, some of that is just about the way in which we communicate, actually. One of the things we're really keen to do through our teams is to work with other organisations and advocates or other people who can actually enable us to access properties more effectively, because one of the biggest issues we have is our rate of ability to access properties, and Disrepair is a really good case in point on that, in that, you know, tenants are often go to a legal representative because they feel desperate, and we acknowledge that, but then the legal representative doesn't communicate with the tenant brilliantly. We then don't communicate with the tenant brilliantly either, and the tenant feels stuck in the middle, not really knowing what to do. And often what that leads to is a tenant saying, I don't want the council to come and do any work in my property until my solicitor tells me that's okay. What that does, frankly, is that delays our ability to mitigate risk to tenants. It delays our ability to get in and do work that will actually reduce the problems in a property. And we have a number of those within the system right now where solicitors are effectively advising their tenant not to let us in to mitigate our own financial risk. So we're taking a much more robust approach to that with our legal colleagues going forward. But it is all about communication and trust and confidence between the tenant and the council, isn't it, that? And that's something we really need to work on.
Thank you, Tom.
Right, okay. We've had quite a few questions on that. It's taken some time, but it's probably going to cover some of the other papers too. We'll go to Councillor Baker, then perhaps see if we can wrap this up a bit.
Thank you, Chair. I think we've had some really good questions brought up today. Things that, some of which we've mentioned before. I think one of the points that, as Tom's mentioned, is the fact that the design of some of the properties that we have right around the city, in different areas, the repeats of the designs that tenants have over the years reported the same repair, same damp, time and time after again, are now finally begun to people to recognise that this is a problem with that property, with that style of property. So we're beginning to look at it as a particular property that is right over the city and we can look at and do something about properly. Instead of repairs going out 3 times a year to the same property, the tenant getting annoyed, and why wouldn't you? The problem coming back time and time again. It costs the council money, it costs tenants considerable angst, and we should be looking at that. At last we're looking at this, we're looking at the number of repairs we get on the type of property. It's been very slow getting there, but we're getting there now, and we're seeing the planned maintenance over an area. Tenants accept, it, to my surprise, that they will have to wait longer for a solution, but they say quite clearly, if they get the solution for one and all, then it'll be worth it. So this is what my tenants are saying to me. And I think that is worth noting. A lot of our properties are from a certain era, and they have very similar issues. And we've got to take this on board going forward and have almost a planned inspection to recognise that we're going to get these problems coming up, because that way we'll do 2 things. It will help the tenants and it will help our balance, so it will enable us to do more. To come back to the disrepair and something that Councillor Iqbal mentioned about language difficulties and problems understanding. I've had to deal with one that really highlighted, and when we eventually got to the bottom of it, after officers had been out time and time again, a disrepair unit had been brought into it. it was a Tara rep that turned round one day and said, but she can't afford to turn the heating on. And from that moment on, she got the help and support she needed, and the condensation, which it turned out to be, was dealt with, and it's never returned. We need to make sure that understanding is there, and that really comes down to the housing reps and people listening to members of our TARAs, because they were brilliant. They helped her understand. They helped us come in with a solution, and we should recognise that. And we, as a team, should, councillors, officers and TARAs, if we can work together, can make a major difference and support a lot of people. So you press me button, Councillor Iqbal. It really does matter that we all work with people who need our help and support. Thank you, Chair, for letting me have that rant.
But that's appreciated. Janet, did you want to come back on that?
Just quickly. So one of the things that you will see as well elsewhere on the agenda is that what we have done, even though we've had to make significant savings in the HRA business plan, as the committee will be aware, is we have protected our capital investment programme, and we are spending significant amounts of money through that long-term planned, you know, we're doing roofing, we're doing wiring, we're doing a whole raft of things. One of the things that we're also doing is moving more to geographical improvements where you have particular issues. So we're taking a geographical approach in a number of areas at the moment, at Leadless Valley, at Edward Street, at Stainton, but also where we have concentrations of a number of different things. As Tom says, responsive repairs, you know, is not geared up to deal with those sorts of very large long-term and planned programmes, and nor should it be. So one of the things that we are doing is we're doing a number of things. We have a significant capital investment programme, and that's long-term improvements of stock. We are also this year, we've committed and agreed with the committee 100% stock condition survey. We are hoping that will check the sequencing of mainstream capital investment, and we've got it scheduled in the right years, in the right place, and whether we can bring some of that work together. And also the intelligence from the repair surveys, you know, where they're going, how are they dealing with repairs, what is constantly recurring, so that we use that information to be able to form. We've got on the work plan as well, as part of the HRA business plan, later on this year as well, is our asset management strategy. And that is key to, as part of not only we're clear what we're doing and how we're investing in our homes, but also that is co-produced with our tenants. So we're working together to look at what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, how we're going to deliver those works, but also that will relieve, hopefully, long-term, some of the pressures on our current repair service, which I think is a priority. It talked about, obviously, tenant engagement, and I know we've had a number of discussions around tenant engagement, and our current community engagement strategy expires this year. So one of the things on the work programme you will see is our new community engagement strategy, and that is co-designed and co-produced with our TARAs, and also with input from our many thousands of tenants as well, so that we understand how we engage, how we involve our tenants in decision making, but also how we take their views into account. So I think as part of that work, that provides a really good opportunity to rethink about how we're talking and working with our tenants. And we do need to put some additional work and support in with our TARAs, because our TARAs are valuable in the community. We are losing TARAs, and actually they are really helpful in terms of frontline, particularly housing repair services, to be able to support individuals who sometimes would like the TARAs to support them in a way that maybe as officers we don't always get it right.
Thanks for that. I know members like to talk about this issue, and it is an important one. I wonder if we can take Councillor Masters and Councillor Norris, but if you can keep it fairly brief so that we can move on. Okay. I just wonder, though, just Jan, whilst we're on that, we know that some of our tenants are targeted by claims management companies with leaflets round the blocks. For members, what's the advice to tenants so we don't get drawn into this spiral of costs that are then taken out of the system and, as I said before, which other tenants have to pay for? What is the message to tenants when faced with this situation?
One of the things that we are doing is we're doing a lot of work presently with our tenants bulletin that goes to all our tenants. We've got we've got some really good take up with some of our tenants on social media and other platforms as well. Our advice to tenants, if they are struggling to be able to get the repairs carried out to their home, or if they are vulnerable and need support, we have reached out to tenants who need hardship support through this very difficult period. That was really the underpinning key message is please come talk to us on the disrepair. The early resolution team is to try and unblock anything that our tenants are struggling with. So please come to us. You know, we will try and do everything we can to help and support, and if there are outstanding repairs, you have the commitment from Tom and myself that we do want to get underneath some of these issues. And if people are nervous about contacting the council, we need to remove that nervousness, and we just need people to come forward and ask for our help and support. The other key thing is to utilise our neighbourhood officers, those patch officers. You know, they can, raise orders for repairs. They can try and act as, go between. They do work really closely with the repair service. And so, if they're not using the normal channels of communication, please use the neighbourhood patch officers because they are there to help and support tenants.
Thanks very much. And I wonder if there's a role for all the elected local councillors to help that with some of the, especially with some of the communication, like Councillor Gazzi, communication is difficult in all languages. Dean, did you want to add?
Thank you, Chair. The key challenge for myself and Tom in relation to how we deal with the maintenance of our council properties is to make sure we get it right first time. In that way, the solicitors haven't got an avenue to go down. If we are fulfilling our obligations and completing our repairs to a quality standard on time, there is no case to answer. So that is our ultimate strategy in relation to how we're going to resolve this. Once we've got rid of the COVID and the solicitors disappear.
Right, thanks very much. Brief questions if you can. Councillor Norris first.
You've mostly answered it, Janet. Thank you very much. The only little follow-up was I was really pleased to hear that we're really getting on top of our stock quality assessment through Capital, which addresses a lot of the issues. I just wondered what the communication was between that programme and repairs to flag up whether the stock quality schedule needs adjusting at any point because there are key things coming in that could be underlying. For instance, I just raised Trenton Rise because I'm getting a little flurry of roof problems.
So one of the things that we are doing is we've been working really close with the repair service to try and understand where they are visiting and some of the key issues, and Tom obviously confirmed that earlier. That helps like inform. We've obviously got our stock condition surveyors because one of the things that we do as part of the 30-year asset management plan, sort of clear of when parts will run out, so how many years a roof will last, how many years the windows will last, how many years will the kitchens, but also that also depends on certain circumstances and how parts wear out, and that's where the stock condition surveys are absolutely critical. So are things actually wearing out at a faster pace or a longer pace, and so that the asset management plan can change. And that's where the repair service is absolutely critical, along with tenancy management officers, because they are going into a lot of properties and they say, well, actually, we can't see in things that are starting to look like it's early product failure, and inform that in the future capital programme. One of the things we can do is we can move the capital programme and reprofile where it needs to be. We need to avoid those big high peaks so that we're smoothing out that programme, but also to make sure that we are getting just in time. And I think some of the reports, has been said at the committee, are quite related. Repairs performance that Tom's damp and mould, disrepair and things like that. And it is likely that we might need to spend more on the existing shop in the short term, you know, and obviously that is obviously going to be obviously a discussion with the committee as part of the HRA business plan. But also, if that then avoids, you know, the real situation that many of our tenants are finding themselves in terms of, you know, really struggling with, you know, being able to get the repairs that they want to see in their homes, and our ability to be able to manage the repair service moving forward. And as you can see, there are huge pressures on the repair service at the moment. So we need to be looking at what we can take out of that to take a planned approach. And we've got a number of examples now where we're taking more of a geographical approach. And in some areas that will work better, I hope, as part of our asset management strategy, than sometimes just elemental programmes. Sometimes elemental programmes for a key product that's failing, like, you know, our roof programmes and things like that, will always be needed. But sometimes we need to package work up so that we're hitting those properties ones to avoid, you know, backwards and forwards into properties doing improvements. That needs to come forward as part of our asset management strategy. It certainly will be a discussion part as part of our future years HRA business plan, but also we need to look at, you know, what is the intelligence that we're getting from our stock condition surveys, from our repair service, to be able to inform those future plans. And I think I'm expecting that we might need to spend a significant amount of time in knowledge briefings working through that.
That's right, thank you, the holistic approach there. Councillor Masters, if you can.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm hoping you'll be able to help me out in this one. Really, sort of, it's in response to Councillors Morris and Iqbal's comments about sort of work teams, if you like. Just to say, I was so impressed with a visit that Douglas and I made to that small team. I was looking for his name, I can't find it on my phone. Small team under the guidance of one of your officers who takes on apprentices at different stage in their training, puts them on real life projects, and the skill and the professionalism in that small team of apprentices with some proper tradesmen was really impressive. And so what I'm saying is, yeah, we haven't got them yet, but they're coming on stream. And if that can be rolled out even more, I just wish I could remember the name of the officer who was responsible. Thank you, but really positive.
Tom will tell us.
Thank you, Councillor Masters. I will pass that back to Steve Willis, who's the officer who oversees the work of fire damaged properties. So he's part of our planned team. He actually does a lot of the work on disrepair cases as well. I would always take this opportunity to say how proud I am of our apprentices within the service. They're absolutely genuinely brilliant. We've got nearly 100 apprentices within the repairs and maintenance service. I stood in front of our new cohort on Monday morning of 17 new, fresh-faced, slightly frightened-looking young people. But it's just absolutely brilliant to see it, and they are, you know, genuinely. So we've got some hugely talented young people coming through in the service now, and they are working really closely with our, you know, some of our really experienced, talented people who've been here for a long time as well. You know, take them under their wing and make sure we get them where we need to be. So I think there's some positive stuff from a workforce perspective in the service at the moment.
I'd be delighted if their work was highlighted. It's such an innovative way of tackling apprenticeships. Brilliant.
Yes, thanks. And it's a good point to wrap that up on. It would be good if we could actually publicise some of the work that they've done. We did talk, I think, at that meeting with Steve Willis about getting some of their work highlighted on the council's website to show, A, what's being done, but also what opportunities there are for people coming in as apprentices to the service. And yeah, I mean, I've seen that site twice. They did a pretty cracking job. So let's see where we are. So just to try and summarise some of these issues. So this paper is specifically about cases that are being taken through the court for disrepair. I think we all know the ongoing issues with the extent of demand for disrepair and, you know, the state that we're in, the work's being done to address that, the new apprentices coming in, the focus on the teams and the reorganisation teams to doing the best to deal with the repairs. I think the message we're getting across is that where tenants, we understand why tenants are frustrated about repairs not getting done, note the difficulties with communication and maybe the ways that we can all help to get the right requests to the right people in the right place. Where those disrepair claims are going through, I think the figures show us that it's not a particularly good deal for the tenant. You're not going to get rich on that. And the advice from some of these solicitors and claims management companies can actually lead to delays in repairs where they're telling you not to allow repairs to be done until, frankly, they've got their costs. So that is a worry. We are also paying out quite a lot, which is all money that tenants have to pay, that's effectively leaving the city and is being taken out of the services to tenants. So I think we've all got reason to be wary about that. For the committee, I just wonder if, just want to check where we are. If you, the recommendation is on page 36, and that's simply to note the report, which is fine. On the work plan for this item, though, our original intention was to approve the early resolution improvement plan. Now, that's obviously a work in progress. That's set out at paragraph 1.18 on page 41. Indicates it's work in progress. Looks good, looks like the right direction. The question for the committee is whether we want to just note this and move on, or whether we want to bring back this early resolution improvement plan for further approval in the hands of members as to whether we want to do that. We should probably make a decision given that there's a slight mismatch between the report and what's on the work plan. Councillor Turpin.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't ask any questions because my colleagues asked the ones I'd noted down already. So, but I was thinking that, you know, we have been talking about this for quite a while, and it has kind of seemed obvious as, let's get some more people in, and I know there has been issues with that. And I was thinking about asking, why hasn't it been fixed before if all we need is some new people? But
it's not as simple as that, no.
So
can I just check?
I think we do need to come back.
Is this a further question, or is it about how to resolve
this? This is what you just said, Douglas. I think we do need to have it come back to see that the new teams have been recruited and have had a positive impact.
Right, so it's a preference there to bring it back. Is that, Councillor Iqbal, you wanted to...
Very briefly, it's what the officer said around the financing. As you're our chair and you'll be on strategy and resources, it's ensuring that there's no delay, that there's anything we can do to speed it up. Do we need to call it, I'm just putting this out there, an agency finance subcommittee? I'm just using that as an example. I think it's important. You know, it's fine as presenting, and you know, we need to resource and equip our officers so they can do this. So if there's anything you can do as a chair to support and push the resources that are required, that's my only ask.
Yeah, no, that's right. That, I think, brings us back to the discussions within the HRA. It's quite difficult to fund this work from non-HRA sources because of the ring-fencing rules. But yeah, I will say as chair, then we always push the issues at strategy and resources when looking at the whole corporate commitments. Just on this issue about the early resolution improvement plan, suggesting that we do bring that back, is that... So perhaps we can have hopefully a short report when there's a bit more work done like that, and it'll just help keep it in members' minds and so on. So with that, are members now happy to approve the recommendations on page 38 to note the report, and then secondly to ask officers to bring back the early resolution improvement plan at a future meeting? Well, suggestions on whether is it something that could be brought back, say, for the next meeting, or shall we leave it open-ended until it's ready? Dean?
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the plan, the plan can be brought back before the Christmas period in relation to the key milestones and making sure that it's a very clear and smart action plan so you can see what the milestones and the outcomes are that we're looking for from each of those aspects. In relation to coming back on reporting on that, I would probably say it would probably be about 6 months before we've got anything tangible that would be different than we're talking about today. Right, so if we ask for the early resolution improvement plan as a plan to come back, we have a short report to this committee, say at the December meeting,
would that be helpful, acceptable to members? So if we have that as the second resolution on this one, so the committee asks, Rachel, the committee asks that the early resolution improvement plan finalised is brought to the December meeting of this committee. Have we got a December meeting? We have got a December meeting, yes. Okay. Let's do that. Is that agreeable to everyone? Yeah, nods all round, so we can take that as unanimous. Great, thanks. So it's a very helpful discussion. It's 11:20. Let's move on to the next item. I'm hoping that with some of the further items, we won't need such a long discussion because we've actually covered a lot of the disrepair issues. I should just say thanks to Andy Smith from Legal Services, who's kindly appeared at the meeting today. We haven't actually need to ask you any questions, but I think it's fair to say the committee all appreciate the work that Legal Services are doing to defend the rights of the council and all the other tenants who are impacted. So, appreciate it. Damp and mould update. Shall we move on to that report at page 45 of the agenda? And over to Dean. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Again, the report sets out where we are. Just in summary, this is a follow-on report from the reports I presented in December of last year in relation to what happened in Rochdale, what the request was from the Independent Housing Ombudsman about how we're going to respond to those particular cases. So the ask of the committee today is note the contents of the report, note the progress that we are making in relation to the Ombudsman's 26-point spotlight report and how we as Sheffield City Council are responding to the challenges of damp, mould and condensation in our stock. But also importantly to approve a new damp, mould and condensation policy that we will be adopting as part of the work around the spotlight report to ensure that we are fully compliant. One of the challenges that we have in this world of damp, mould and condensation is that regulation is changing on a weekly basis. So we're focusing our attentions on dealing with one thing and then DLUC or the Ombudsman will come out with a separate level of compliance requirements to address that particular point. The self-assessment report that you have within the paper is a work in progress. Our expectation is that we'll be fully compliant with the Ombudsman's requirements by the time we get to the end of this current 23-24 financial year. We have some work to undertake to make sure that we are fully compliant and understanding our relationship with our customers and gaining access to properties and knowing how our properties behave in a particular circumstance. And that follows on from previous discussions around how we're using our stock condition surveys and asset management data to fully understand how properties are behaving. Because properties do behave in a different way depending on how many people are living in a property and how it's ventilated and how it's used. So we've got to do that piece of work. We're also carrying out an external peer review at the moment as well. So we've got the Housing Quality Network in the service at the moment to look at how we are addressing all aspects of our service, including damp, mould and condensation, so that we can learn from our peer organisations and other registered providers who may do this better than we do at this moment in time. And the expectation is that I will bring a further update in 24-25 with the very clear expectation that I'll be able to come and say we are fully compliant with the Ombudsman's 26-point spotlight report and what difference that is making to the tenants of Sheffield City Council living in a council home. So again, I'm prepared to take questions, Chair.
Right, thanks very much. And just noting the main purpose of this report is to approve the policy that you'll find at page 63. Councillor Turpin.
Thanks very much. This is really interesting work that's going on here and you can see that this is an early step in the overall project. So I've just got a couple of things to ask about. In the monitoring of people's homes for damp, will there be a qualified professional in-house team to do that monitoring? And I personally think that would be of great value to us as landlords, and the use of smart monitoring things. You know, we know that relative humidity, it's all about relative humidity, which is closely linked to temperature and is largely dealt with by ventilation. So smart monitoring of those houses, like as Dean said, homes are used differently. No home is standard. And in relation to that, there's something, I'll just read it out because it's a bit creepy, because there's also, you mentioned dust mites, which is directly related to relative humidity in the same way that damp is. So you're like this. If the pillow on your bed is more than 3 years old, then around a third of its weight is likely to be dust mites and their feces. So buy new pillows regularly. Bit gross. So that's going to lead me on to the findings of the investigations and monitorings. Will there be a budget available to implement measures, whether those measures are decided to be and or a combination of insulation, ventilation, and maybe new pillows? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we have qualified internal surveyors who are looking at all aspects of damp and mould when we receive the reports, but we also use external surveyors as well to second guess, because some of the cases that we have are slightly more complicated and complex, so we're using a mix of internal and external. We are using smart monitoring, and we'll be doing more of that in relation to understanding how we respond to damp and mould, because one of the challenges that we have is some of our properties and some of our archetypes are demonstrating annual reports of damp and mould. What we want to be able to understand is, once we think we've put the fix in place, we monitor the behaviour of that property and understand again how it's performing. So when we start talking about relative moisture content and the dew point and in relation to when condensation forms, we know what is happening in each of our individual properties. This comes back again to the previous conversation we've had around the stock condition surveys that we're undertaking. So the expectation is over the next 18 months we will have 100% or as close to 100% stock condition data that we've got, so that when we start to think about what the future capital investment is going to be, we can very clearly understand where are our worst performing properties, not just in relation to damp and mould, but in relation to every aspect of repairs and maintenance for those homes, so that we can put the right solution in place. It's not good enough that we will be here in 5 years' time saying we know that a property has got damp and mould, but we've not done anything with it. We need to be very clear around setting our priorities, coming to you in the future in relation to committee decisions and saying these are the challenges that we're facing within the HRA business plan. Very clearly, damp and mould is a priority for us because of the issues that it has on health and well-being of our tenants and their households. Therefore, that will be prioritised. In relation to budgets, against that will come back in terms of future HRA business planning decisions that will be made at the Housing Policy Committee in relation to the amount of capital resource that will be required to fix some of these properties. And I'm not second guessing what will be in the Road to Net Zero report that will be coming here in November, apart from to say, to get us to a point whereby we're heading towards net zero for our properties and dealing with the whole aspect of damp and mould. It's not a multi-million pound solution, it is a £1 billion solution in relation to how we're going to apply that investment. So whilst there will be budgets there to deal with aspects of damp and mould, we need to have further conversations around how we resource the whole element of making our properties more insulated and better in relation to our tenant base.
Thanks for that. Okay, before you come back in, just wonder if you can just tell us, for the benefit of the rest of us, what actually is smart monitoring.
A smart monitoring in its purest sense is understanding at what temperature in a particular archetype property condensation forms. Condensation is the major cause of damp and mould. Other aspects of damp and mould, as people may know, are we can have rising damp, penetrating damp, we can have leaks through gutters, but the vast majority is the moisture content in a home from boiling a kettle, having a bath, having a shower. If the property is cold and the moisture content is at the right level, condensation will occur regardless.
Thanks, it's helpful to have that cover. Councillor Turpin, do you have another one? Then we'll go to Councillor Baker.
Thanks. And also the point of the smart monitors is that can be monitored remotely, so that you go into the house once, install your things, Yeah. So I just wanted to ask a follow-up question regarding, regarding budgeting, which it may be a bit unfair because it might be work that you haven't done yet, but I'll ask you anyway, and it may be a personal opinion. So with, say, for example, you're looking into a block of flats and a flat has damp and mould, or some of the flats, you know, if I'm thinking of a scenario which might lend itself to a solution for the whole building, but that solution might be either not budgeted for or several years down the line. Is there a plan to have a solution for that one home in the, you know, right away? Sorry, that felt a bit clumsy while I was asking it. Oh, you get my point.
The answer to that is yes. What we're doing is, in the past when we've done stock condition surveys, we've used what we call clone data. So we've looked at a particular property and then transposed how that property is behaving across to the properties of similar archetypes. What we're doing through the stock condition surveys that we're undertaking now is we're undertaking the survey on each particular property. So we know through our responsive repair programme, if we have a property that has damp and mould, the likelihood is a similar property of a similar archetype has got the same kind of conditions. But again, that depends on whether there's one person living in it or whether there's 6 people living in it. So we will not transpose the data from one property. We will then go and have a look at the rest of those properties of a similar archetype so that we fully understand the implications. If there is a damp and mould requirement on an individual property, we will spend that money immediately to resolve that particular problem. It will not wait until a 5-year time. However, what we will be doing is triangulating our data from the data that Tom collects on the responsive repairs world to the data that we're collecting from remote monitoring and through our stock condition surveys that says which of our properties in relation to our 5-year capital programme require that investment in years 1, which require it in years 2. They will not be equal in priority. We'll have some property and archetypes that require immediate investment. And that's what the asset management strategy that Janet alluded to earlier will articulate, that where do we need to prioritise our capital resource to deal with these multitude of problems that we're talking about at the moment.
Thanks, Steve. I think you just used the phrase cloned data there, and we were just saying, well, what's he on about?
Sorry,
do you want to just say a little more about what that is and what the advantage is?
Okay, clone data is whereby we would take Exeter Drive. We would undertake a survey on one property on Exeter Drive and just transpose that to the other properties on Exeter Drive, because we would automatically make an assumption that they would all behave the same way. That is not the case. Each individual property behaves in its own individual way. Therefore, we'll be doing individual stock condition surveys rather than doing a clone process.
Right, okay, so a helpful idea. Not all council flats are the same. In fact, they're all different. Right, okay, you're okay with that. Should we go to Councillor Baker? Oh, sorry, Tom, have you got something you want to add on that? Yeah, come on.
It was just really briefly just to say, in terms of expertise, the repair service, we also use an external specialist damp contractor to try to identify solutions in properties. As Dean has said, this is really multifaceted. When you get into an individual property, it could be something to do with the nature of the fabric or whatever of the property, the ventilation, but it can also to do with, and I know Councillor Bacon mentioned it earlier in the previous time, it can also to do with simply just the financial situation of the tenant in the property not being able to afford to put the heating on. So your solutions are sometimes building solutions and are sometimes actually people-related solutions, and identifying those is a huge challenge for us actually as a service. What we do and what we have put in place in the very short term is the mitigation. So what we will always do is try to get in quickly, try to remove damp and mould so there isn't a health issue, to give us the time then to work out what the actual solution is in all that complexity that Dean's very articulate, has described very articulately.
So
thanks so much. Janet, you've got something else to add?
So one of the things I hope that you've heard this morning is that this is a moving feast. You know, we are doing a huge amount of work across services, including obviously our customer services, you know, who receive the calls on a regular basis, and also the work that we're doing in terms of the cost of living and also how we use our hardship support. So huge amounts of work. But in terms of the main sort of compliance area, which is obviously the key part of this report, it is progress. It is the progress we are making towards compliance. This policy will need to flex and it will need to change, and we need to keep you regularly updated on that, because as Dean said, you know, the changes and more recommendations are coming out of government on a regular basis in terms of things that we need to look into. That will change the policy. There are things that they are recommending that we do, like our stock condition surveys and other things, which we need to take into account as part of this policy. It will keep moving. It won't be fixed in stone, and it is our first attempt towards compliance. But the Housing Quality Network, when they conclude their report, will also, we hope, bring some recommendations of short-term improvements that we can make as well. That will change the policy. And so one of the things you can expect as a committee, that we will be providing regular updates to amend this policy as we go along, because it's probably not a type of policy that can stand for every year in stone, because there are lots of moving parts and lots of things that will change that we need to reflect in that policy. The other thing is, it's also about people living in our homes, you know, and one of the things that Dean explained is that we have lots of tenants that are not switching their heating on, that are worried about switching their heating on. There are that maybe feel that, you know, they're closing all the windows, so we're not getting adequate ventilation because they are worried about their heating bills. We are doing a special tenant bulletin about help and support as we enter into the winter period, with all the help and support that is available. And damp and mould will be part of that, as well as obviously things like, you know, reporting a repair, and those areas. And it's important, and Dean mentioned it earlier, buildings are made to be warm, and if they're not warm, that can have major health impacts on people living and our tenants living in their homes. So we have to address that. We're going to have to flex our hardship support funding that we put in place for our tenants, and we are also going to have to reach out to tenants through our tenancy management and other opportunities to say, if you are struggling to put your heating on, please come to us, because the health impacts are quite considerable. And as you all know, we are really under a lot of pressure in terms of our accommodation and being able to move people from one property to another. And so it's really, really important that we get that support in place before damp and mould takes over some of these properties.
Thanks. It's very relevant to talk about the health and well-being aspects of housing. Absolutely essential. Councillor Baker for the question.
As quickly as I can, is to pick up something Dean said, and actually both Tom and Janet have hit on it. Access to properties. If you can't get access to the property, it doesn't necessarily only impact on that property. It could very much be, for example, the property below, if you're trying to get into that property to stop a leak. Yeah, so just saying I can't get into a property, and I know how hard you try in some cases, it doesn't necessarily impact on that property, and it's not necessarily anything other than a personal issue within inside that property. So, you know, when we're thinking about these things, we don't necessarily also have to think about a block or a thing that could be an individual item, and we need to make sure whatever it is, we can get access and we can sort it for whoever needs it, not only the tenant, but possibly the tenant below. Thank you, Chair.
Yep, fair points. Not really a question, is it? Questions? So, actually, should I take Councillor Norris first? I'm just giving priority to people who are regularly on the committee, because you know what you're talking about.
Just thinking, it is eye-watering amounts of money, but how much are we looking at this in partnership with things like the decarbonisation plan? Because presumably there's a lot of work that would deal with both issues.
Absolutely, Councillor Norris, and as I say, you will have a conversation with Nathan in the next coming weeks in relation to the work that we're doing on that, and we'll be bringing back the roadmap to net zero to the November committee meeting. But it goes hand in hand. it goes back in terms of the thermal insulation of our property. But we've also learned lessons from other organisations who have gone too far in relation to the thermal efficiency of their properties. And I've had experience of that in my previous organisation, whereby we made properties that efficient. We were creating dust mites and we were creating breathing problems and other problems. So we've got to make sure we fully understand every aspect of health and well-being in how we are improving and enveloping our properties. So at the moment we're currently doing some external wall insulation projects. What I've asked my team to have a look at is how that piece of work is then changing the behaviours of the property itself. So we can say just enveloping a property with thermal insulation will make a significant difference. What I want to know is what difference it makes in relation to the relative moisture content and the dew point, and how that is impacting on people's usage of utilities, electricity and gas within those homes. So it's a major part of the work that Nathan and his team are looking at, and I say we'll bring that report back here in November.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Iqbal, yeah, no disrepair to subs, but actually credit to the other members of the committee who do keep up with briefings and so on. Councillor Iqbal.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to fall for that. Again, thank you for you folks. Do you get time to rest or sleep? It's just full on. It just seems. I mean, just a couple of points. It's how we manage expectation as well. You know, there's a lot of work that's gone here. We've been instructed by government, and there'll be expectations by tenants out there that, you know, we're going to get this problem sorted really quickly. And picking up what Janet said, that regular communications with tenants to manage expectations is key. Quick few points from me. I welcome the report that shifts the blame away from the tenant, because the tenant, I was a caseworker for Jill Furnace a few years ago, and some of the flats up there, you know, I'd been out with officers where they were saying, you know, the tenant's not opening the window, blah, blah, blah. And you could see the tenants were frustrated. They were trying to, you know, Mazza, we clean the window, we keep it open. So it's really good to see that we're moving away from that blame culture. The second point I'd like to make again is repeat that comms. As you've mentioned there, I think it's important that we address that. The question I'd like to ask is on page 54, it's the first one. Does Sheffield City Council is looking to expand stock condition survey process to maximise blah, blah, blah. Is that something we do on an annual, again, because of everything else you're doing, you just think where's the capacity to do this extra bit of work? So, again, is that something we do? Is it a bit like what you said on the clone data? We check one property and in a sense that speaks for the rest. So it's just trying to understand how often we do it, what we're trying to get out of the survey as well. Thanks, Chair.
Yep, thanks. One of you want to answer that?
I'll answer that one, Chair. In terms of the stock condition data, what we're looking for is to get to 90% plus stock condition data within the next 18 months. And what we will be doing then subsequently after that is reviewing 20% of our stock each year. So we're constantly going to be on a 5-year rolling programme in relation to how we understand. And we know then that will form future conversations with Housing Policy Committee around future HRA priorities. Because whilst we may have, let's say, a poorly performing estate in year 1, by the time we get to year 3, we may suddenly have found ourselves with a worse performing estate. And therefore, we've got a team in Leyland in terms of relation to the priorities and the budget and the spend around where we're doing that. We can only do that if we are regularly reviewing our stock condition data, but also working with our repairs colleagues and understand what is being reported on a daily and a weekly basis through the responsive repairs service to double check what we're seeing is actually correct. So it will be on a 5-year rolling cyclical basis, but the vast majority of the work will be undertaken within the next 18 months, so we've got a full picture on year 1, so we can start to make some decisions.
£10 million worth of investment, which is on, I'm just trying to find the page, it's page 58. That's a considerable amount of investment, and hopefully that brings in some of the efficiency and real-time data. I mean, once it's up and running, it'd be good for this committee, and I'll mess up, but probably the other members. It'd be worth them going to have a look at how that new system's working. Thank you, Chair.
Right, thanks, yeah. I think I suppose a comment rather than a question, wasn't it? Tom, do you want to come in on that?
Just very briefly on Councillor Iqbal's initial comments about managing expectations and communication with tenants, etc. It's probably just worth saying, and I said a bit of this earlier, that you know, we're really clear that we can't wait often for the long-term solution to a property. We will always try to mitigate risk because we know the health damage that damp and mould causes to our tenants. So, and this can often be quite frustrating to our tenants, I have to say, because the first thing we will usually do is go into the property and paint and clean, because actually it removes the risk. It gives us a window of opportunity. So you're right in terms of how we communicate with our tenants. Now we explain why we are doing that in the first instance is really important, and we are really trying to do that better. We've trained all of our staff, all of our frontline staff in terms of our approach to damp and mould now. And we've been really clear with our frontline staff and every manager in the service, and we've rolled this training out within housing colleagues as well. To say, and into children's services, to say this is no longer an issue, that it is the tenant's responsibility to try to resolve, even if it is about, you know, needing to turn your heating on, needing to, I mean, we need to support our tenants to know what they need to do in terms of managing their property in the right way. So it is really about us taking that responsibility. So with the right messages are out there, but no doubt we will occasionally just need to reset some of that as we go forward.
Thanks, Tom. There's a good point to reinforce that, you know, it is our responsibility as a landlord. So, put your mic on, Janet.
Part of the work of the task force that we set up, that we detailed, you know, we have got cross-council and cross-strategy organisations engagement in that, and also with housing associations as well. And that's been really, Penny, you touched on earlier about sometimes access to properties, and that's been really important. So sometimes we may struggle to get access into properties from either housing or repairs, but actually a lot of those families may well have a social worker, they may well have a support worker, they may well have other people going into those properties. So the reason why we've rolled out what is an excellent toolkit from the repair service across to those officers is because so that they can understand and have a nose around and see what damp and mould looks like, you know, because it's not, you know, easy to spot initially. So that's something that's been a real priority, and also with our tenant representatives, you know, real priority to understand what it looks like, and also then the sooner we can get that into the repair service to do the work that is needed, like the better. And that's why the tenant communications is really important, you know, so people can stop the early, we can identify it at a much earlier stage, and therefore the resolution is much quicker and easier to do and less traumatic for families.
Right, thanks, Jan. So, is there any urgent one? That's quick.
Can we have a link to that for councillors? Because I'm thinking also what you were talking about, Councillor Baker, about it being a partnership, TARAs, councils, officers. It's like if we know, we can be more useful with our casework. And could we have a copy of the peer review that the Housing Quality Network's doing
when it is being completed, which is due probably towards the end of October, we will be bringing that to a knowledge briefing. Probably the recommendations will then come forward as part of the HRA business plan.
Thanks, that will be helpful too. Right, so let's see, so on page 46 we've got the recommendations. So there's three. It's essentially noting the report, noting the progress made in complying with the Ombudsman Spotlight report, and that's the table set out at page 44, which is our self-assessment, so we're being asked to note that. And being asked to approve the new damp, mould and condensation policy, and that's the one set out at page 63. So the question for members of the committee is whether we need to do anything else, and I'm asking us as to whether we need to do anything to bring any of that back, or whether we can just approve that. Any particular steer from anyone, or should we just deal with recommendations as set out on the paper there? Councillor Baker first.
Chair, we don't necessarily need officers to speak to it all the time, but we could possibly have a written report that will keep us up to date. That would possibly be quite useful.
Yes, let me just take Councillor Turpin and Councillor Iqbal and then see what we can suggest.
I was just going to say that within the report there are other dates, there are other key milestones. There are other milestones within the projects that is the natural time for them to come back, and I would just suggest that if there's anything that's raised there that links back to this, that's the opportunity we'll naturally have to speak to them about it. Right, thanks. Yeah, Councillor Iqbal.
It was on page 49, I think Councillor Turpin is referring to the recommendations in the report. It mentions that we're fully compliant with 11 and partially compliant, and the table sets out the direction of travel. So having something, a note just to say that we've met the date would be good. Just a final point, and I should have brought this up, page 66 where we've got the diagram. I mean, a case study would be better. I mean, you could do that with anything. You know, you report and we deal with it, blah, blah, blah. I just think in future, if a case study could be used, that'd be better. But Chase, really good. I mean, it's amazing what you folks are up to.
Okay, yeah, Janet, what if you can come in that? Just on that last point, Councillor Iqbal. So that diagram, yeah, whatever you've used on it, it's part of the draft policy being asked to approve. I mean, is it something actually objecting to?
No,
Can we live with it for these purposes? Okay, thanks. Just want to clarify that. Janet, over to you.
Just very, very, very quickly, if I can suggest there's just a slight tweak of the recommendations, and the reason for that is I was involved in a meeting with the government team last week where they are going to bring some proposals for consultation on damp and mould, you know, particularly around the journey map of customers, but also the links to rehousing and the links to, again, around additional support for tenants. This could change the policy. So if I could just slightly change what we've talked about today, is this is our progress towards compliance, and I think it's really important to say, because one of the things we may need to do is share with the committee how we respond to this consultation that is planned later in the year. So maybe the recommendation, the second recommendation, maybe note the progress made towards complying with the Housing Ombudsman, just in case any future recommendations come forward from government that we haven't taken into account in the policy.
To be fair, I think actually, yeah, you clearly have made progress in complying with the report, and no one's saying that it's fully done. So to be fair, I don't see any problem with the wording there. I think what you're flagging up is something really important, that we're expecting something more from government. Will probably result in a need to review this policy in the near future rather than the 2 years that's set out in policy. Would it be sensible to set a date for this committee to either have an update or review the policy? Would it be, I'm just thinking about, we're talking about putting something else on the work plan for March, possibly?
Thank you, Chair. I'd support put something on the work plan for March and then an annual review after that. And the reason why I'm saying March is we're saying we will be compliant with the action plan at the end of March, so we'll be able to say how much progress we've made in actually achieving that, and then an annual review against those targets.
So could we, if we take that forward, could we note the 3 bullet points on the recommendations, but then also that the committee asks that officers provide a further report and any necessary review of the policy for the March 2024 meeting of this committee? Would that work for everyone? Yeah? Nabila and team, would that work for everyone? So with that, shall we take that as agreed on those now 4 points? Rachel, have you got a note of that? Yeah. Excellent, all right. That's been really helpful, and it gives some context for something ongoing. Thank you very much. Okay. So we've done item 9. We've got 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we've got a few items to go. It's 10 to 12. I'm just asking people at the moment whether people would prefer to expect to extend the meeting after 12:30, or whether prefer to rattle through these and deal with them fairly speedily and end the scheduled time. Any indications at the moment without being bound into anything? So you're looking to get things wrapped up by 12:30. Of course, yeah. Well, I think that's right. Let's rattle on as quickly as we can. Let's move on to item 10. Slight change of tone here. This is a review of the licensing fees, isn't it? Catherine, you're already in your seat. Members are on page 77. I'm hoping this could be done relatively quickly. Would you like to, Catherine, introduce what the report is? Assume we read it, and we'll be rattling through that.
Yeah, will do. Thank you, Chair. So the report is seeking approval to implement changes to our HMO fees that fall within mandatory licensing, so anything that's occupied by 5 or more people. I will try and be as brief as I can, and obviously I'll have questions, but we are quite open about the fact that we absolutely need to review the HMO fees. It's been a while since they've been reviewed, back in 2012. Excuse me. So, along with the fact that we are overdue carrying out the review, we also need to be compliant with some case law, where currently we charge a HMO fee as one fee, where we need to split that into 2 parts, so there's 2 clear parts to a HMO licensing, so we need to do that. We need to set the fee using a 5-year budget. The whole idea with HMO licence fees is that it's self-funding, so it isn't a burden on the public purse. We are looking at introduction of additional penalty charges, excuse me, really cough once, I'll say it, which will pass on the cost of managing non-compliant landlords, so we are making sure that landlords that do not comply face that higher fee. And I won't say that because that will make me talk for quite well. We currently have about 2,000 HMOs that fall within licensing. We are aware that some landlords, and it is the minority, will work outside of the law and will operate HMO licenses, HMO properties without obtaining a licence. So we are obviously looking at some proactive work to make sure that we identify them. It is important to establish that it's not just a property that's 5-bed that becomes licensed, it's if it's occupied by 5 people. So you could have a 7-bedroom property, but if you only let out 4 of them. So it is quite complex work to identify them. It sets out the increase, which equates to a £435 increase over the 5 years, and that's £237 yearly. So it puts us kind of 7th on the table. You can see that in section 22, part 22. So we moved 15 to 17. So we're not the most expensive, but what we've done is a lot of work to look at what resource goes into this. When you apply for HMO licensing, obviously the licence is processed. We then send an officer out to inspect that property to ensure that it complies with HMO licensing standards, also management regulations, and we will then later on go and do a compliance visit to make sure that, because if you go out once at the beginning of the 5 years, we need some reassurance that they still meet those important standards. So today we are asking that you approve that fee increase. Is that too quick?
That's fine. We've got some questions there. Yeah, we've got some questions there. I mean, I think we probably want to focus on, not the whole HMO regime of what you do, because that will be a long, lengthy discussion. The aim here is to increase the fees. So is it fair to say, in summary, that fees haven't been increased for some reason since 2012, and that we're talking about an increase there and an update. If that's the case, we've got some questions. So go Councillor Iqbal first.
Who gets to go before me, but not answer?
Because I'm the chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Catherine. I mean, it'd be good to get understanding at HMO, and I'll be very quick. And if I could because I don't understand if you can limit HMOs in a certain area, because of the impact it has on services, schools, blah, 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 but happy to pick that up later. But the main point is, how big is the team? And I fully appreciate full cost recovery. And I would have gone to the levels of Manchester or even Bristol. I think it's important because you mentioned 2,000 properties. On page 74, on item 25, it says that approximately 12,000 bed spaces and so forth, around 10,000 bed spaces for young. The numbers are huge, and obviously you need the people. And me and Alison, Councillor Norris, were just having a chat, and she's right. The danger is, me as the landlord, I'm just going to pass it on to the tenant, and it just makes that that pound for that tenant just stretch further. So for me, why wouldn't we increase, so we can have you know, a proper resource team that doesn't rely on the HRA. But if I can separately, Chair, out of this meeting, I'd like to understand how HMOs work regarding my patch, because we'd like to understand the limit and so forth. But for me, I would advocate increasing the fee further.
Right.
If we can't do it this year, bring it back for next year.
Yeah, so just to see how we can deal with those questions in this meeting, I'd suggest with the sort of broad aspect how HMOs work and how they might relate to Darnell Awards, would you be able to take that up separately with Councillor Iqbal? But with the fees, is your question really, are the fees enough? Catherine?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Because it's been a while since we reviewed the fees for varying reasons that are set out in the report, what we've done is we've obviously been running mandatory HMO licensing for a number of years, so we've looked at what the resource requirement is. We cannot make a profit, so it's got to wash its own face and purely that. So what we've done is assumed the resources that we think we need. The tricky bit with HMO licensing, because you renew every 5 years, you have a little peak and a little trough. So you have quite a lot coming in the first 2 years, and then they kind of tail off. So what we've built in, which we haven't had before, is we will review the fee annually. So we can look at how costs have potentially increased or decreased. We will monitor that every year, and then at the end of the first 5-year cycle, we will look at, right, have all those fees correct? Did we have, has it washed its own face? Have we had to become reliant on general fund? And that does include the potential that we may have actually made some money. So we would look at potential for refunds at that point. And after that 5 years, we can then look and review if, right, we know that this has washed its own face. But the important thing for us is that the annual increase of staffing costs and varying other things are factored into this review. But at the moment, with the experience we've got, we do feel that the resources that we are charging for via the fee will be adequate and will be able to make sure that we can carry out all the inspections and the compliance visits, which we obviously legally have to do.
Just didn't want to under-resource you, but thank you for the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's really important point that we need to make sure that we're not that we as the council are not subsidising landlords. And just some anecdotal feedback was from someone who knows about property management. All these fees always regard just nominal compared to the profits that landlords will make of large HMOs. Catherine, do you have something else to come back on?
Sorry, I just wanted to add into that as well. When we talked about landlords that potentially operate illegally, where we do discover that, we can now serve financial penalties of up to £30,000. So as well as bringing them into licensing, there is that penalty for that landlord, which legally has to be ring-fenced within our service. I mean, serving the fine and then getting the money for the fine is a different conversation for another day. But it's a really good tool that we've got to make sure that landlords do operate legally because of the obviously consequences if they do not.
Yeah, it's a very important aspect of business regulation, isn't it, when you consider how many people in Sheffield live in HMOs. Okay, Councillor Turpin.
Thank you. I mean, Mazza stole a bit of my thunder because I was also going to say, can't we charge more? And you know, if you look at the cities above us in the fees, you know, there's nothing. Well, perhaps Bristol, but there's nothing that shouts that they have a higher cost of living than in Sheffield, and probably Derby and Bradford have a lower cost of living. So, should we not be up there? And it's welcome that you say it will be reviewed annually, and I can't figure out how that would impact on a 5-year cycle of licensing. But in the unlikely situation where a surplus was made, could that not just be reinvested in extra investigators or the likes in any case? And I'm just think like aiming for a break even, considering that we've been subsidising this sector for at some point between now and 2012, and certainly to see that that last year we were subsidising it by 1.6 million is pretty frightening. So A, could we reinvest any surplus, and which would enable us to charge more and risk making a surplus, and B, would any surplus be able to go to offset the previous however many years worth of subsidies that we have been providing.
Not sure we can make sense of that question, but yeah, I think it's, I'll leave it to you. Yeah.
No, I do understand the point. I think I understand the point you're making. I think in addition to what we're doing with the fees, the way that we process and deliver HMO licensing has changed substantially over the past few years. So previously, and I'm going back pre-COVID, a lot of assessments were done desktop. So if you submit the right documentation, we'll come out and do that initial visit, and a compliance visit might be a little bit less formal. So what really, I suppose I'm sort of repeating myself, and I apologise for doing that, but the law is very clear that it must only wash its own face. So we've set out our resources, what we think we need to do, well, our experience of what we need to deliver this scheme, but that's why the annual review is in. So year on year, we can check that this is washing its own face, but because licences run over 5 years with a peak renewal starting next year, that's when we can say in this cycle of licensing, we got this right or we didn't get it right. But you wouldn't want to do that necessarily every year because you haven't run that cycle. So you've not done your compliance visit, for example, you've only done your initial visit to make sure they comply with standards. There is a table at the back, I think it's Appendix 3, where we carried out quite a lot of consultation with landlords, and we have looked at additional services that we can charge for. So we are looking, one of the big issues we get is missed appointments, where you make an appointment and nobody's there. So just as an example, what we're saying is actually there are costs absorbed around invalid applications, around inspections not going ahead, which is a waste of officers' time, and then it has to be rebooked, where really that shouldn't sit in the licensing fee, because not all landlords should cover that cost, because the majority do let us in and they do work with us and they're compliant and offer really good accommodation. So we've tried to pull out those fees to try and cover those costs without making everybody pay for it, and that's where you have the difficulty of balancing up, making sure that the fee structure is fair as much as it can be.
Thank you. It's an important part of fairness, but it was also an important part of fairness, and I think we're getting a message from the committee here that it's really important that landlords meet the entire cost of what's needed to regulate this part of the sector, isn't it? And it shouldn't be subsidised by all the taxpayers in the city. Are we happy? Well, let's look at the recommendations that are on page 78. Essentially, it's approval of the new fees. I think you're saying, Catherine, that we will have an inbuilt annual review of fees. So for the same people sitting here next year, then you get a flavour that you'll get support for making sure that you do have enough money to cover the resources that are needed. Does anyone think we need to add any further recommendations? Can we just, right, can we, yes, Councillor Turpin.
Sorry, just wonder if I'm just starting to get a bit confused about it. So when you're saying that the cycle is 5 years, that's from when someone applies. You're right, yeah, so there's constant 5-year cycles throughout. That's fine. I just was starting to think that you were saying that they were all aligned, but they're not.
No, so mandatory licences starting, I think, is 2006. So your majority of applications came throughout 2006. So you have this, obviously others come in and out of licensing, but the variation changes, which is why we've timed this report now, because we are coming into a peak renewal year. We've come out of COVID, we are aware that there were concerns around the fee and that we're not charging the right amounts. An awful lot of work has gone into making sure this is in place now. So that when we hit the next 5-year cycle, we're not relying on general fund to cover this work, which we absolutely shouldn't be.
That'll be in 26.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you. So if we move the recommendations, page 78, are members happy to approve those as set out here, approving the changes to the fees and from the dates there? Right, I think we can take that as unanimous. Thanks for your work on that, Catherine, and if you can think about planning in when you will next need to bring a paper to this committee for approval, so that it's at the the earliest possible time that suits the needs of the service there. Thanks for your work on this, and good luck, and do keep us informed of that. Okay, so if members now go to page 105, the next item is the Housing Ombudsman complaint handling code and our self-assessment of it. Janet, over to you, I think.
Hopefully, this is fairly straightforward as a report. So one of the things we have is the complaint handling code, which was introduced in July 2020 by the Ombudsman, and obviously there's been a further update in 2022. So the Ombudsman, the Housing Ombudsman expects social landlords to manage customer complaints and describes best practice and supports landlord in responding to complaints effectively and fairly. A requirement of the code is that we need to do a self-assessment against the complaints handling code annually, and also have an action plan in place if we are non-compliant. The report hopefully is fairly straightforward. It details the self-assessment that's been carried out. It identifies a couple of areas in particular for improvement. Nothing really further to add other, but happy to pick up any questions.
Right, thank you. Yes, so questions starting with Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Chair. This is curiosity. Page 113, code section 2.2, you pick up complaints via Facebook. Is it sort of that they message you via Facebook, or is there another method? And it is just a very, very brief sort of clarification.
So what's the Facebook name then? Okay.
Yeah,
it will take, but I mean, sort of, how do you take off Facebook? I know how I do, but
we are now using a whole range of social media platforms, as well as our traditional approaches, as well as obviously our customers who write into the council, email into the council, and obviously go through our customer service. So one of the things that we do is we review the information on social media, and some people choose to contact us via social media, and if sometimes there is a pattern of complaints, then we will lift them from there, try to make contact with the customer and make sure that we feed them into our complaints process.
Thank you. It's just the thought of having someone sitting there watching Facebook postings on a daily basis. That might...
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Question. Oh, Councillor Turpin.
Thank you. I'm just noticing that so the majority of the criteria we conform, but some of them, well, 4 of them are partially conformed.
Yeah.
Does that mean that overall we don't conform?
Well, what we have is we've got a small number of areas where we have a detailed action plan in place to do that and to embed. We're doing huge amounts of work across services on complaints, but it does mean that we need to put an action plan in place to ensure compliance, and that's what the Ombudsman would expect from us.
Right. And just how much
if we had non-compliance with all of it, then we wouldn't be compliant.
Right. Well, I think that's. I was just going to say, how much of a risk then is that? Is it something that we ought to worry about?
I think one of the things that the Ombudsman expect, they expect us to table this report. That's obviously a formal council committee, so you can see where we are compliant, where we are non-compliant, and also that, through council governance, you can expect, me to take that away and make sure that we've got risk mitigation plans, and we're putting in place the actions that will make us compliant as quickly as possible during the annual review.
Thanks very much. Right. So if you look at the recommendations on page 106, it's about noting the outcomes that we've talked about, approving the publication of those outcomes, and then a review in 6 months. Everyone happy with that? Nods all round? Yeah, okay, let's take that as unanimously approved. Thank you. Move on to the rattling through stage. Next item is on back to housing and repairs performance report. Now, because we had quite an extensive discussion about various repairs issues and management issues before, hopefully we'll save a bit of time on this. But is it Tom or Janet who's going to introduce this fairly briefly?
I can very briefly, Chair. I think I said yesterday when we had the discussion in the knowledge briefing, I think The way I would describe the performance at the moment in repair service is probably challenging, especially on the responsive repair side. For all the reasons we discussed earlier, actually, and that demand level that is still there, we are trying to mobilise additional resource, but it is a really challenging environment. There is some good stuff in here that I would want to reflect. You know, our gas compliance is significantly improved in line with the, you know, the work we're doing with the regulator and the additional, the productivity increases within that service. Our improvements around electrical certification and other safety and compliance things, which were the very, very top, you know, top of the list things we wanted to deal with quickly, are getting better. Similarly, our compliance in terms of fire risk assessment is there as well and full. So some good, but some challenges still in the service will be my summary.
Thanks. And Janice, anything you want to add from the housing management side?
I think a similar picture. There is some good performance, but there is also areas, you know, we are seeing significant pressures on housing management, on our homeless services, and, you know, we have unprecedented demand for housing management services and particularly affordable homes at the moment in the city. So there are a number of areas for improvement. I think you will also see the report that we have now embedded fully the agreed landlord commitments, the tenant satisfaction measures and the regulatory compliance areas. You know, they will from next year be formally reported, and so you will see some of that, our performance being reported nationally. We have spent quite a bit of time at the knowledge briefings on the individual performance. It is a mixed picture. But it also reflects there is significant demand for housing services at this present time, and but there are some areas that we should be doing better than we are at presently, and that's the focus of our attention and action plan to make sure that we are prioritising those services that mean the most to our customers.
Right, thanks very much. And you haven't mentioned the voicing, so members at the knowledge briefing just the other day found a very useful discussion about the new approach to voids management, which covers both housing management and repairs and other things too. So that's quite positive there. Should we take a couple of questions and then move on? So bear in mind we have had that briefing, then let's not too much of a Councillor Iqbal.
Yeah, cheers. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I was as a substitute, I wasn't at the briefing. I mean, as we've touched on repairs, page 118, satisfaction is going down. Hopefully some of the discussions we've had today, that will hopefully move an upward trend. Couple of quick questions. It was on page 121 on gas safety, which you've mentioned, Dean, we're doing well. And then on 2.5.2 improvements, we've got a bit of a backlog, and then if I, sorry for jumping here, Chair, but if I jump onto page 150, which is on the budget, on 1.7.9, it says we're holding vacancies in fire safety, tenancy enforcement and communal areas. It feels a bit perverse, and usually it's the council who usually say, can you put a freeze on all this because we need to manage the budget? I mean, there's got to be some common sense. It puts pressure on the service. Are we not, you know, fire risk and safety, it's really critical. And to be holding vacancies and where we've, and you touch on ASB where we've got issues and we're trying to address that. But if we go on the budget page, on tenancy enforcement team and so forth, you know, 300 grand would buy a considerable resource. On fire safety, if we had £330,000 available, again, that'd be a considerable resource. So, for me, Chair, you know, what more can we do to ensure that, you know, it's sensible to hold and have vacancy freezers, but on safety, you know, I just find that staggering. Okay. I've got a couple of questions. I'll come back if I could get a response to that.
Yes, okay. So, yeah, vacancy management.
You know, as part of this year's report, obviously, we made changes, obviously, and reduced some of the headcount. However, that is not the reason. We are not holding vacancies. we have some areas of the service that are incredibly difficult to recruit to. But these are national shortages. We have high turnover in a number of service areas, homeless services, some of the technical services, some of, obviously, we've talked about ASB services and across the board. So one of the things that we are doing a considerable amount of work with the council's HR service, thinking about how we can recruit differently. In housing, we have something in the region of 147 apprentices, so we're recruiting apprentices, recruiting graduate apprentices, higher apprentices, but also we're also working closely with the colleges to make sure that they are, they have the courses available, that we can actually, take people from college when they are qualified. We're also going out into our neighbourhoods. We've got, a strong track record of recruiting from our communities into housing, but there are some areas where, we do require the skill and expertise, and we are struggling to recruit in some areas, but in some areas we're also struggling to retain officers. So we're doing a comprehensive piece of work. We are working on a new workforce development plan to look at how we can address some of the skills, and you will have seen in the news, a real drive to professionalisation of the service. So we, at some stage, we need to bring that back to committee to explain what that means and what the guidance is regarding that. But we're not holding vacancies, but sometimes we are going out a number of times to recruit, and sometimes that's a little bit of a challenge at this moment in time. But what we are doing is covering services, in the best way. It puts more pressure on existing staff, and a credit, to lots of staff who are, going the extra mile to deliver services, whilst we actually get the skills in place to be able to deliver these really important roles. And if we can, and during that period, if we can do things differently, then we're choosing to do that to make sure we can maintain service delivery.
Thanks, yeah. So workforce challenges, Tom.
It wasn't, to be honest, Chair. I was just going to pick up the previous comments from Councillor Iqbal around a couple of the performance things, just to clarify, because there are some slightly confusing things within this report, especially around satisfaction, I have to say. So probably we've clarified, we do two different kinds of satisfaction surveys. We do a general satisfaction survey that everybody gets, and they are asked to comment on their satisfaction with the repair service. And then we also do a satisfaction survey directly after we have undertaken a repair within somebody's property. What we've seen is a slightly different trend on those two surveys. So the first survey, our satisfaction has actually improved quarter on quarter by a couple of percent. On the second survey, it's gone down by a couple of percent. So I have to say these satisfaction measures are very much about, a sample and everything else. So we're watching that. Clearly that's an area of concern for us, that we want that to improve, but actually it's probably static is probably the best way of putting it at the moment, rather than a fall in satisfaction. The other thing I just wanted to really quickly say is on the electrical certification. That's not, I wouldn't call that a backlog. What that is a move from what was a 10-year certification regime to a 5-year certification, and what that reflects is that we now have about 66% who are within the new 5-year regime. That's not a regulatory requirement in some respect, but we are moving now on to get everything that was in the 10-year to the 5, and over a period they will all become compliant within that 5-year period. So it's just to clarify those two things, Councillor Iqbal.
Right, thanks. Yes, more questions, Councillor.
Page 123, and I'd like to thank Janet. This is probably a personal interest because it's in my ward. I mean, it's good to see that we're acquiring, because in my patch, I mean, I think it's great news. We've got Attercliffe Waterside. The first house gets built in 2025. That's the first phase. Due to viability issues and everything else, we can't get any social or council homes on that development. Waiting list, Chair, 14 years in my patch, so you've got no chance. It's good to see we're acquiring, it says 114. I mean, the challenge, as we all know, is roughly about 900 properties per year at Labour Group. I remember our leader, Tom, saying, this is a challenge for the authority. But for me, the question is, Chair, I'd like to see, it'd be brilliant if you could use all that budget to acquire 114. All the councillors here'd say the same as me. So I mean, it is quite challenging, as when we had a conversation where you said, you know, because prices are increasing, it's a bit like the homeless situation. If housing benefit only covers so much, then there's a gap. And the challenge for us, Chair, probably not today, is to understand, you know, where we're acquiring these, because in some parts of the city it's going to be cheaper than, say, other parts. If, you know, if we wanted some council like homes in Councillor Masters' ward, obviously, you know, the cost there is going to be a lot more than what it is in Darnell. So it'd be good to understand where we're acquiring these properties, how is it meeting, you know, our waiting list. And for me, being on a personal level, thank you very much for trying to provide some social council homes in Darnell. It's a huge challenge, and not looking for an answer today, but if we could get a breakdown of what's happening in the next few years as well.
Okay, so on acquisitions, yeah, it makes sense for us to keep
We can
tabs on
provide and
them.
capture that information. You know, we've got it all mapped out in terms. Acquisitions are of two different types. You know, market acquisitions, things that we see that are for sale. Sometimes, obviously, people who've bought their homes through Right to Buy will ask us if we want them back. And also working really closely with developers, and we're getting some really, you know, really good quality acquisitions from, you know, from new supply, with working with like developers and bringing that forward.
Is that on a floor? Do you buy it? Because I'm trying to understand. Because obviously when you buy it from the market, me as a developer, I'm going to put whatever the full price is. Do they really discount? Because I keep hearing this on, you know, when you buy it off the floor plan before a brick is laid. Do they really sell that at a discount rate? Does that ever happen?
Sorry, Jan, I just wonder if we should move this into a knowledge briefing, moving away from performance management, relevant stuff, and we perhaps do need an update on that.
I think probably it's worth a knowledge briefing, but also to provide, you know, exactly where we're buying, what we're buying, how we're funding it, and that we can provide that detailed report.
Perhaps we could get back to members in one of the knowledge briefings, programme something in. Right, okay. Keen to go over to Councillor Masters and then Councillor Turpin.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's page 134, Managing Tenant Arrears. 3.3.1, at the very last sentence, reduction in former tenant arrears is due to proactive approach we're taking with statute-barred debt, which is leading to an increase in write-offs. Can you explain, I mean, basically, what is the time cut-off for trying to sort of chase arrears? And do you have a figure for how much we are losing? Because I'm assuming here it means that tenants know what the time limit is, and they're previous tenants, and they're doing their best to sort of get past that deadline.
We don't routinely write off arrears. Sometimes individuals obviously will leave the properties and not be in council housing for a while, and then we'll come back and register and obviously bid for a council property. And one of the things that we always have is we have that debt. We classify on difference between current rent arrears of our existing tenants and former. And we have a team in place that looks at individuals where someone may have abandoned the property, they may have moved on, they moved out to the city, and at some stage we often find that individuals come back. The other things we don't tend to write off very much, but what officers do is where we have families in extreme hardship and we can't see that they're ever going to clear that debt, in very exceptional situations, then we feel that it's right to take a straightforward, but we look at that alongside our hardship fund and also other support that might need to go into those. What we are very successful with is working with people who are struggling in hardship, where we can have more longer term payment plans that deals with the arrears, but also making sure that they're in a place that they can afford their housing costs and that. So we can provide the detailed breakdown, but it's not as straightforward, we're going to like just take off bad debt. It's very much related to individual circumstances because we don't routine write off debt. But one of the things that we will do is my officers will make a pragmatic decision based on individual circumstances where we feel we need to, and sometimes weigh up the cost of continually pursuing for arrears based on actually, you know, sometimes you just have to say, right, we're never going to be able to collect that debt and let's clean the account.
No, no, that is fine. I've got no issues with that, but that sounds if it's existing tenants, and it was the wording of this, former tenants and a cut-off date.
Yes.
And that is the issue. That's I'm thinking, because all the rest I accept. I mean, oh, gosh,
Yes.
you know, sort of you've got to take personal circumstances into account.
Yeah.
So is there a legal
There is a
cut-off
corporate,
date?
do you want to comment? There is a corporate debt strategy around any writing off, but we don't write off unless we absolutely think there is absolutely no chance, and a number of years have gone by and we're not going to be able to collect that debt. David, Dean, do you want to add anything further?
The normal statute board is 7 years in relation to debt, but it's 7 years if we do not pursue that debt during that period. If we've not pursued it after 4 years and then we try to pursue it, then the 7 years starts again. So people can't hide behind a 7-year statute because we're very robust in relation to how we then pursue the debt. So it's completely rolling.
To get.
Right, thanks. That's made some progress. So let's just see. We've got more questions on this. We're really going to have to extend time a little bit, so I just want to ask permission, Leading, to extend, well, let's say for the 30 minutes. So been quite a chatty bunch this morning. Are people happy to extend? We may not take the whole 30 minutes. Hopefully won't. I appreciate Councillor Mullally, you've got to go, but yeah, is everyone happy to extend as needed? So we can do those questions. Right, let's do that. So we'll say we've extended by 30 minutes, but still let's run through these. Councillor Turpin.
Thanks very much. Couple of things that I just want to press on the EICRs, that they are statutory, and I raised this point at the previous quarterly review in June, and it doesn't look like there have been any more done, although it is a very broad figure of 66%. Or 35% non-conforming. There was 34% non-conforming in June. So, A, what's been happening with those, and B, is there an estimated time when we will be as compliant as we are with gas safety certificates, for example? The second question I wanted to make is that there's quite a significant section on shared living spaces, which is really good to see and shows an interesting insight. I just wondered if I was having a conversation with a housing manager recently, and they were saying that lots of their estates team time is spent picking up fly tipping, and limits the amount of time they get to clean up the shared living spaces. And so it feels like that is kind of hidden in this section, and I just wondered if that can be brought out more in future reports, whether that be more with statistics or just something a bit more explicit. Thank you.
Probably one each for Janet and Tom there. Who wants to go for, or Dean? Anyone?
In relation to electric certificates at this moment in time, there is no regulation from the regulator of social housing in relation to moving us to a 5-year programme. We have voluntarily made that decision, pending a decision from the regulator of social housing later this year, very early next year, where they will put it into regulation that it will be a requirement on us to have 5-year certification on our electric certificates. We are prioritising our resources at the moment to close down any cases that are beyond 10-year certification, and then closing the gap between years 6 to 9 to make sure that we are compliant. The target date for that we've agreed with the regulator of social housing is the start of the 26-27 financial year, where we will be into a 5-year rolling programme, and additional resources were applied through last year's Housing Revenue Account business plan to make sure that resources were available to make that happen. So the expectation is we'll be back on target for a 5-year programme in 26-27.
Okay, thanks. Janet, on the other issue?
I think you've obviously raised a significant issue that we have. Half of our stock obviously are flats and masonettes now, and that requires some quite intensive management. We've also got a situation where we've got some areas where need to do some improvements for the waste management arrangements and also to address some of the fly tipping arrangements. So one of the things that does mean from time to time is we have to take resources away from the cleaning into actually supporting other activity. We are presently reviewing the resources because this is a priority for tenants, and we are obviously seeing higher incidence in some areas of pest control issues that we are trying to tackle as well. So we can bring it more out into the performance report. Our tenants saying this is a priority. We're doing some quite intensive work in some particular areas. And we're also trying to make sure that we're using the resources that we do have sensibly in terms of tackling local issues, rather than a one-size-fits-all in some of our neighbourhoods. But we certainly can bring that out in future reports.
Right, thanks very much. So if you look at the recommendations, we're being asked to note the report, which is fine. The second option is to highlight issues of concern we wish to address in future reports. And although you've got some tweaks to what suggests there, Janet, it doesn't seem to me there's anything that's substantial we need to resolve as a committee on that point. Does that seem okay to everyone? So we can just note this report, so in other words, paragraph 1, don't just delete paragraph 2 here because we're not formal. Yeah, that's right. So are we happy with that? Sorry, Councillor Norris.
There was just one other question. Is that all right? Before we move?
Yes, of course. Yes, go ahead.
You're saying, it's probably to Tom, that there's been an issue with the way that responsive repairs completions being reported, and that we may not have completed as many repairs as we thought we had. I just wondered how much, if there's any, it may be just wait for the next report, but I just wondered if there's any sense of how much more how much bigger the backlog is than we might think.
I honestly don't want to guess at that at the moment. Yeah. We're working through it at the moment. We know we're working a lot with our IT provider at the moment, and there appears to have been an IT problem. We haven't lost any work. All the work is in the system. What it appears is that the performance figure may have been calculated using effectively the wrong number of days. So all the work is still in the system. There's no change in terms of what we have actually repaired. It's just about how the actual calculation has been done. And we found a similar thing on the emergency repairs as well, which we'll see within the report, where I think we're currently reporting 60% emergency repairs done within the 4-hour timescale. We simply don't believe that to be correct, because we know if that was the case, we would be seeing a really significant amount of contact in terms of us not having carried out said emergency repairs. So there's something going on within that calculation within the system that we're working really hard to rectify, but we'll bring it probably between now and the next performance report. We'll bring something through the knowledge committee to update on that.
Right, thanks. No, it's a valid point to pick up there. So with that noted, we have to note that report. Okay, that's a unanimous thing, isn't it? Thank you very much. So finally on to the finances. So we've now got the budget monitoring report on page 141. I was wondering if someone could make some space for Liz. Thank you, Dean. Liz Goff, welcome to the seat. Thanks for waiting patiently and hopefully go on with some other work in the meantime. It's appreciate, towards the end of the meeting, we've got the report here. Assume you've read it. If there's any particular highlights to draw out, then please do that. Otherwise, we'll go straight to questions. Liz.
Thank you, Chair. Liz Goff, Head of Finance Business Partnering, standing in for Jane Mulby. I suppose it's just really to highlight, this is the first report that we've done for 23-24. The full report went to Finance Committee on 11th September, where we reported 17.6 million overspend on our net revenue budget for general fund. We have got some resources set aside for that. Remember, we set aside 70 million worth of reserves to draw on to mitigate risks. We've got 30 million of that left. If we have to use the 17 million of that to balance this year's budget, that will only leave us 13 million going forward to cover risks going forward. The main challenges do remain our budget implementation plans. 47 million was going to be delivered in year for general fund. We're forecasting about 37 million of that. So 78% delivery, which is better than last year. We were only delivering 65% last year. We have got some one-offs that offset that, those overspends, particularly around social care grant and income coming in from health, around supporting hospital discharges. So I think we've got a bit of an underlying overspend of around 25 million going in 23-24. The main areas being adult social care at 3.2 million, education, children and families at 8.9 million, mainly around residential placements and homeschool transport. And the one that you'll be interested in this committee is housing at 8.4 million, which is around homelessness demand and our lack of supply in terms of accommodation and how much we can claim back via the DWP and housing benefits. We're not alone in this. Of course, cities are reporting similar issues, particularly around the children's placements. So very quickly, just in terms of that 3.2 million overspend in the general fund, the housing solution teams are setting out a set of short and long-term solutions to deal with that, and it's set out in your report at 1.7.3, and a further report will come to you in November. On the HRA, I think we've discussed this quite a bit. We're showing £500,000 underachievement against the budget, which will represent a reduced contribution capital programme. The main issues being voids and repairs and maintenance, and again set out in detail at 1.7.5 to 1.7.12. Very briefly, the other bit I just wanted to quickly mention was the medium-term financial analysis was reported to the Strategy and Resources Committee on the 7th September, setting out the general fund position for the next 4 years, identified a gap of 61 million over that 4 years, of which 18.1 million, 18 million is for 24-25, and they're asking policy committees to look at those targets that have been set, to come up with proposals about how those will be addressed, to come to the November policy committee, as well as working on in-year budget plans. So for Housing General Fund, the target was 3.5 million for next year. That is really mainly around that homelessness issue and the DWP. For the HRA, we're doing some more work on that. We're busy working through the plan. The initial view for 24-25 is a 2.2 million gap. So it's a quick battle through. Happy to take any questions.
Right, thanks for that. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Rachel's just asked me to point out that we are looking at the quarter one budget monitoring, as it correctly says on page 141, and not quarter two, as it says on the main index page for the agenda. We're in quarter two, but it hasn't finished yet, so we can't actually monitor it. Thanks for that, Liz. I think we'll get Councillor Baker first.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to bring to the attention of the committee, which has already been mentioned on page 146, 1.6.3, which Councillor Iqbal obviously mentioned earlier on, is the lack of control we've got on the spend of that money, and how at the moment it's giving us an extra 3.5 possible deficits that we have absolutely no control of at all. I know some work has been, and there's been some conversations with government regarding this, but I think it's something we should never miss the opportunity of getting in the minutes, because in the tight budgets we've got, that is an awful lot of money that we have no control of. So thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to get this again highlighted. So thank you.
I think that's actually a very important point to record, isn't it? That it's a really disgraceful situation if we have this amount of money slipping through the net on a technicality which completely undermines the government's housing benefit scheme, where it's not meant to be local authorities paying it out of taxpayers' money. It is meant to be a scheme. So if, I'm hoping this representation is being made at national level, and this is something I think we need to come back to. I wonder if actually you can tell us what is happening at national level on that issue, because it must be affecting every local authority, not just us.
Yes, and there is quite a lot of work taking place with other local authorities who are facing exactly the same position. Homelessness is increasing nationally, and also we know that there are significant shortages of affordable housing and specialist housing that many areas of the country are sorry. This does seem, a difficult ruling in terms of benefits that can be claimed, given that we are having to place lots of people in emergency accommodation. It's a significant issue, and there is lots of cross-working taking place with local authorities, both with the department, the Do Look team, government team, but also through the financial, the core group and financial directors, of which obviously there is regular representations in saying that this is really, really difficult at a time when illness is increasing, and we simply have got a shortage of accommodation to be able to place people. So we are doing that job work. There is consistent messages. There's also messages from other registered providers about some of these issues, and we will continue to do that. This is really difficult to see how we can reduce this cost given the demand pressures. But we are working closely with financial colleagues. We will need to look at this as part, obviously, is the 24-25 budget, and looking at what we can do in this financial year. Maybe not be able to cover the whole gap, but is there something that we can do towards that? And I think we've had, regular, updates at this meeting around the significant pressure on housing solutions at this moment in time.
Right, thanks very much. It's an important issue. So as a committee, we're going to need to be dealing with this in advance of the November meeting and at that meeting. This is mostly for information. Got further questions? Councillor Iqbal.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Baker, for highlighting that. And we should highlight it every opportunity, and if you can, Chair, when you're at SNR, because I think it puts unfair pressure on the service, because we're going to be saying to them again, find a saving on top of where they're not getting reimbursed for everything else. And if we look at the impact on vacant properties and the cost of overspent on repairs, again, not down to our fault, due to COVID, as the officers highlighted, we're talking millions and millions of pounds of pressure on a service that hasn't created the problem. And I think it's important we lobby government to try and bridge that gap for us, Chair. But one of my concerns, as I mentioned earlier, and I think it was Dean and Tom who came back, it was on 1.7.9, where we've got an underspend, and the posts are key. Sorry, that's in my opinion, and we should try and fill those vacancies. The second point is, I read these papers last night on my laptop, and I can't find where it said it made a comment on the district heating. It's underspent by £500,000, and rather it being put back into the black hole of the council's budget, is there anything we can do to support tenants? Because we know energy costs are rising and so forth. Here we have a fixed figure, but there's a £500,000 underspend, and if there's anything we can do to support our tenants.
I think it's page 152 you're looking for, 1.714. Janet, do you want to just explain the working of the community heating account?
One of the things that we have is, I think we all reflect, is that the utility pricing and the energy bills has been quite problematic with significant increases, and we were faced with the unfortunate community heating is a ring-fenced account. So the charges have to reflect the use, and we do everything we can to support people. We've put in heat meters, we've done quite a lot of installation.
You're doing a great job, Janet,
like
because
and that. So one of the things that we don't want to do, will ultimately be a committee decision, is to find ourselves that we are increasing mid-year community heating bills because energy prices have risen. So we will always need an element of reserve to avoid that. So I feel that is a a fair reserve to hold on community heating. What we do, we also have the hardship fund for anybody facing, you know, disproportionate hardship and struggling to afford their heating bills with our hardship funds, and that applies to people with a traditional heating scheme, or whether that is something people are on community heating schemes. But I do think that it would be unwise to remove all of the reserve, and I think we need that because we really don't know where energy prices are going to be over the next year or so.
Right. Please support that, Chair. I mean, just on the overspend, I mean, if it's 8.4, 1.6 takes us to 10, it seems like we've got 11.4 million, which is a huge amount of pressures on a budget which is out of our control, in a sense. And I think, you know, we don't want to be coming back and saying freeze more vacancies and do this, that and the other, because, you know, that has a perverse effect, doesn't it? If we reduce, I'm just saying, repair staff and so forth, it just has a perverse effect. I just saw, you know, on 1.7.9 on fire safety, as it says there, on tenancy enforcement, because Janet must be fed up of the amount of casework that her and her teams pick up, and it just continually puts pressure, and communal areas come into my patch, they're always complaining. I just think, you know, we're not holding back this, we're allowing the service to use it where it's needed. That's what I was trying to get to. Thank you.
Okay. As in the interest of time, we're probably best to park that. Obviously, as you know, we will have to look at the finances in considerable detail over the next few weeks and before we come to the next committee. Can we park all that there? We're just being asked to note this report. Councillor Norris, have you got further questions?
I can see your heart sinking when you see me waving my hand. It's only where do I bring back that thing that I asked about in the work plan about getting the issue-focused workshop about the HRA business plan before November?
Yeah.
We are arranging that, yeah, for sometime in October.
Will we have external person there? Or somebody from will we have an external person there, like someone from another authority?
We can do, we need to have that discussion obviously at knowledge briefing, but we'll also have finance colleagues as well working with us.
That's great.
Because obviously it's not just the in-year or the year in front. The HRA business plan has to be a balanced 30-year.
Yeah.
And that, so sometimes if we have spiking costs in 1 year and that carries on, that will create significant viability issues further down the line. Also, the more we borrow, the more we have to service debt as well. And that, so it's quite comprehensive. So one of the things that we would normally do is have quite a number of sessions, both on terms of our general fund and in terms of HRA business plan, so that we all understand obviously the financial pressures, the total financial pressures, as well as the income that comes in, because it is a ring-fenced account. And this year, I think we've got some particular housing general fund pressures that we need to get underneath as well, and we need to have those conversations about how we're delivering services and what are the options moving forward. So we're aiming to try and get those sessions in October.
Let's bring this in through knowledge briefing. I mean, it does seem that the first thing to do is to get members to understand what the issue is before we decide whether it's helpful to bring in external people who then have to start from scratch. Can we leave this for now in the interest of time, Councillor Norris?
Only that I put a bid in for people to check people who are arranging it to look at my Outlook diary, because all my NHS shifts are in there. Because I would really, really like to be able to come, because I can rarely come to the knowledge briefing.
Let's do what we can, but without making promises. It's always difficult to get people together, but that's why we have one rep from each party group. Let's move on. So we've simply got the recommendation to note this. I think people have to do that. Move on. Thank you very much, Liz. On the final item is the capital report, page 155. Dean, can we do this? And I mean, Council members, unless there's any burning questions, we want to get this wrapped up in the next 8 minutes, so we don't have to extend time yet again. Dean, we've got the report here. I mean, it's written, assume we've read it. Are you happy to just take questions on it? Yeah. Does anyone have any burning questions that weren't apparent from reading the report? Can we just note that? I think we're just noting this, aren't we? Yeah, the recommendation on page 156. Note this. There's all the important stuff in there. If so, that is all the items for the meeting. So there's actually been a huge amount of stuff that we've been supervising, monitoring, checking on and asking relevant questions too. So thanks for bearing with us even with the extended time. Thanks to all the officers and everyone else who attended. Don't think there's anything else we need to do. We'll convene as the committee again in November, but in the meantime we've all got quite a lot of extra work to do, so pay attention everyone and do try and get to the briefings. Thanks very much. We can close the meeting.